Welcome to Buddha Bedtime Stories. Take a slow breath. You've come to the right place. What we're entering isn't just a meditation. It's a doorway. Behind it are old stories, passed quietly from teacher to student over bowls of rice, during moonlit walks, or in the hush of temple courtyards. Tonight, that doorway opens for you. Before we cross its threshold, where are you listening from tonight, and what time is it where you are? Sometimes the act of sharing that moment grounds us, reminds us that we are not alone, even in stillness. You don't need to try to relax. Just be. Each story is a kindling flame, warming the cold places inside us, soothing the restless ones, inviting us to remember what it feels like to stop reaching and simply receive. These teachings aren't loud. They come on bare feet. They speak softly, and if you let them in, they change you, not with force, but with presence. Settle in. Lay down the weight of understanding. Let your breath be enough. The first story begins now. In a sleek glass building downtown, an elevator rose and fell like breath. It carried suits and heels, coffee cups and clipped conversations, laptops glowing with unread messages. And in it stood Daniel. Crisp tie, polished shoes, phone always in hand. Eyes darting to the floor counter. 17, 18, 19. Always up. Daniel worked in mergers and acquisitions. His days were booked in color-coded blocks. 10-minute meetings, lunches at his desk, even bathroom breaks planned with precision. He was good, efficient, respected, and completely unable to rest. The elevator was his chapel, the only place he stood still. And even then, his mind climbed faster than the floors. One day, the elevator stopped between levels. A soft jolt, a mechanical sigh, then stillness. Daniel exhaled, checked the buttons, pressed call, tapped the screen on his phone. No service. He cursed, then waited. 5 seconds, 10, a minute, no motion. Panic started to rise. Not fear of being trapped, but fear of not moving. In that silent steel box, Daniel faced the one thing he avoided: stillness. He looked around, at the brushed metal walls, at his own reflection, tight jaw, shallow breath. For the first time in months, he had no signal, no task, no escape. And slowly, something cracked. Not loudly, just a hairline fracture in the illusion. Daniel slumped slightly, loosened his tie, sat down right there on the elevator floor. He exhaled, long and low. He noticed how loud silence is when you're used to constant motion. He watched the display screen, still frozen at level 19. He chuckled. Of course, 19, almost 20. The next promotion, the next salary tier, the next version of himself. Always almost, never here. The Buddha once asked, if you carry a burden endlessly, does it grow heavier or lighter? The answer is, it becomes you, and you forget you are ever free of it. Daniel didn't move, didn't check the time, didn't plan. He just sat, and after a while, he realized he didn't miss anything. The world outside was still spinning, and yet, in here, there was space. 15 minutes passed, then a voice came through the intercom. Sorry about that, sir. Elevator's back online. A whir, a lurch, and the floor counter resumed its climb. But something in Daniel did not. When the doors opened at 33, he didn't step out. He pressed G, ground floor, and rode all the way back down. No one understood. But for the first time, he didn't care to explain. Presence isn't just stillness. It's not needing to climb when you don't know why you're climbing. The next day, he came to work with a small thermos of tea. No email before 10 a.m. He looked co-workers in the eye, asked how they were, waited for the answer. He still worked hard, still showed up, but something had softened. Something had stopped chasing. Years later, Daniel told a friend, "The best thing I ever did was get stuck." The friend raised an eyebrow. Daniel smiled. "I needed the elevator to stop, so I could finally notice. I didn't want the top floor. Climbing isn't wrong, but climbing without pause forgets the view, and sometimes the highest level is the one where you sit down and breathe." He never spoke a word, not to the monks, not to the villagers, not even when invited to tea by the abbot himself. He simply bowed and walked and bowed again. They called him the silent pilgrim. He had no belongings except a small cloth bag and thick wooden sandals worn smooth from years on the road. His face was weathered by wind and sun. His back slightly bent, not from age, but from reverence. Because every third step, he stopped, placed his palms together, and bowed to the earth. Step, step, bow. Step, step, bow. He traveled like this for hundreds of miles, through rice paddies and dusty plains, through mountain passes and city streets, through cold rain, sharp sun, and falling snow. He never begged, never asked, never preached, only bowed. When he reached the gates of a remote temple high in the hills, a monk ran inside to announce, "The pilgrim has come." Curious, the monks gathered. Some stood with folded arms. Others watched from the steps. One scoffed, "What is this? A show?" Another whispered, "Surely he must be seeking merit or praise." But the abbot only smiled. "Wait. Watch." The pilgrim reached the stone path before the temple gate. Step, step, bow. His palms touched the gravel. His forehead met the earth. He rose slowly and continued. All morning, he bowed up the path. By noon, he had reached the courtyard. The air was silent, except for the soft crunch of gravel and the long breath between bows. Step, step, bow. By evening, he reached the base of the temple steps. He did not climb them. Instead, he bowed once more, then turned, and began his journey down the mountain. Step, step, bow. The monks were stunned. He never entered. He never asked to stay. He came all this way just to bow. The abbot nodded. And in bowing, he entered more deeply than any of us. This is the story of wordless devotion, of practice not performed, but lived in the marrow of each step. Commentary. In the West, we often think wisdom must be spoken. That truth arrives in grand lectures, eloquent teachings, powerful arguments. But sometimes the greatest teachings are silent. The silent pilgrim did not explain his path. He became it. With each bow, he gave himself to the moment, to humility, to gratitude, to presence. He bowed not to worship the earth, but to remember he belonged to it. In Buddhism, we bow not out of subservience. We bow to let go of the self, to surrender ego, to honor interbeing. The sky does not rise without the sun. The tree does not grow without the soil. You do not breathe without the generosity of everything around you. To bow is to remember that. The pilgrim didn't need a teacher. Every grain of dust was his teacher. Every blister, his scripture. Every bow, a verse in the sutra of the path. He asked for nothing, judged no one, corrected no teachings. He gave only his body, his time, his breath. That was his offering. That was his sermon. One monk, deeply moved, asked the abbot, "Should I walk like that? Bow like that?" The abbot said, "Not unless your heart is already bowing. It's not about copying the form. It's about sincerity. Some bow with their bodies and judge with their minds. Others bow with their actions and remain upright inside. But true bowing begins within. It is a quiet crumbling of pride, a surrender of the need to be seen, a softening into the now. There is a Zen phrase, "The great way is not difficult for those who have no preferences." The silent pilgrim had no preference for praise or obscurity, for arrival or delay. His goal was not the temple. His goal was the bow itself. Step, step, bow. Again and again, until there was no one left doing it. Only the gesture, only the giving, only the way. Wherever you are, whoever you are, you can bow too, not just with your body, but with how you listen, with how you wait, how you serve, how you show up for the dust on the floor or the silence in a friend's eyes. To bow is to soften, to slow, to remember what matters, and sometimes to say everything without a single word. A monk once traveled alone through a deep forest. He'd been walking for days, through mud, through heat, through cold rain. He carried nothing but a worn robe, a begging bowl, and a satchel with a single stone inside. Why the stone? He could not say, only that a teacher once gave it to him and said, "Carry this until you understand its weight." The monk took it literally, and dutifully he carried the stone. At first, it seemed like nothing, but as the months passed, over hills, across rivers, through deserts, it began to burden him. His back ached, his hands calloused, his mind grew resentful. "Why must I carry this?" he muttered one evening, dropping beside a creek. He looked at the stone, round, dark, unremarkable, a simple weight, and yet it had become everything. That night, he slept beneath the stars, and he dreamed. In the dream, he stood in an endless field beneath a vast open sky. He held the stone tightly, afraid to drop it, afraid he might lose something important. Then a voice, calm and distant, whispered, "Are you carrying the stone, or is the stone carrying you?" He awoke just before dawn, heart racing. The sky above him was pale and soft, wide and light. He looked at the stone again and understood. This is the story of thoughts, identity, and the illusion of burdens, how what we cling to becomes our weight. Commentary. Many of us carry stones, regret, shame, an old story someone once told us about who we are, a wound we've wrapped ourselves around for so long it feels like identity. We think we're being strong, but strength is not clinging. It's knowing when to let go. The monk carried the stone because he trusted his teacher. But trust without inquiry is like walking in darkness without asking if there's a door. His real practice began not when he received the stone, but when he questioned it. The Buddha taught that suffering arises from attachment, even to things that seem noble: tradition, memory, belief, self-image. We say, "This is who I am." But who is saying it? And what happens when the self no longer fits? The stone was not the problem. The gripping was. The fear of what it meant to be without it. We carry pain from the past because we think dropping it means forgetting. We carry roles that no longer serve us because we think they are us. We carry anger because we think it protects us. But a clenched fist cannot hold the sky. Later that day, the monk stood on a hilltop and watched the clouds pass. He held the stone in both hands, not angrily, not resentfully, just with awareness, and then he set it gently on the ground, not thrown, not discarded, just returned. A breeze touched his robe. The clouds shifted. He took his next step, and it felt like the first. In that moment, he realized the sky had always been there, unbothered, unburdened, vast, and that somewhere along the way, he had confused being grounded with being weighed down. This is the nature of the mind. It can be like a stone, heavy, fixated, stuck in the past, or like the sky, open, vast, always able to hold the weather without becoming it. The monk never told others to drop their stones. He simply told this story and ended it with a question. What are you carrying that is carrying you? So, pause today. Look gently at the weight in your hands, your heart, your mind, and ask yourself, do I still need this to walk? Or have I mistaken the stone for my path? As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, let us turn to a tale about recognition and the true nature of worth. This is the next story. At the edge of a temple, near the foot of a quiet hill, there lay a stone basin. It had no inscription, no offerings placed before it, no tourists gathered around, but every monk in the monastery knew its story. And when a novice was struggling, that's where the teacher would send them. Go sit by the broken bowl, they'd say, and that was enough. Long ago, the bowl had been whole, carved from a single piece of granite, smooth, strong, revered. It stood in the center of the temple courtyard, used for rituals and alms. Every morning it was filled with clear water. Every evening it was emptied and washed. Then came a winter earthquake, not violent, but enough. A hairline fracture, then a second quake weeks later, and the bowl split down the middle, cracked clean through. It no longer held water. Some said to discard it. Others wanted to repair it. But the abbot, an old woman with kind eyes and a quiet presence, said, "Leave it as it is, let it teach." And so it remained. Years passed. Moss gathered inside the broken seam. Rain pooled only briefly before slipping through the gap. The bowl no longer functioned, but it was not discarded, because in stillness, it began to reveal something else. Monks would sit beside it, touch the cool edge, trace the break with reverent fingers, and slowly, quietly begin to understand. Wholeness does not mean unbroken. The world teaches us to fear breaking, to grieve what cannot be fixed, to measure our worth by our usefulness. But the Dharma invites a deeper seeing, a truth whispered by that silent stone. You are not what you hold. You are what you are. Even when you hold nothing at all. The broken bowl was no longer useful, but it was still itself, still stone, still shaped by care, still part of the temple. Its crack did not remove its belonging. One day, a monk sat beside it after losing his voice. He had been a teacher, a singer of chants. Now, silent, he felt useless, forgotten. Until the abbot brought him to the bowl and simply said, "It doesn't hold water, but it still holds truth." And then she bowed. This is the parable of function and form. So often, we confuse our value with our utility. We think, I can't do what I used to. I've lost my role. I am broken. But even a bowl that no longer holds water can still hold presence, still offer reflection, still rest in the sun, still teach. In Buddhism, there is a phrase, form is emptiness, and emptiness is form. It appears in the Heart Sutra, one of the most profound teachings. On the surface, it sounds like a riddle, but it points to this: what you are is not just your shape, and what breaks doesn't define what remains. Imagine your roles are bowls: parent, artist, teacher, helper, listener. When one cracks, you may feel like you've lost something essential, but you haven't lost you. You are still present, still capable of love, still part of the whole, just as the broken bowl is still part of the temple. One evening, a novice accidentally dropped a cup. It shattered. He looked up in fear, but the teacher only said, "It was already broken." The boy's eyes filled with confusion. The teacher continued, "Everything we use is already broken. We just don't see it yet, so we love it while we have it. And when it breaks, we bow. To live with this awareness is not to be gloomy. It is to be free, to care for things deeply, but not cling to them desperately. To understand that even in brokenness, there can be peace." Commentary. The broken bowl reminds us that identity is not function, that worth is not erased by loss, that something can be cracked and still belong, still matter, still offer presence. There is a time to serve, and there is a time to simply be, to be still, to be soft, to be a presence others can sit beside. Like the bowl, like the monk with no voice, like the abbot who teaches with silence. You are not just the things you do. You are not just the roles you fill. You are not just the tasks you complete. When those fall away, when something cracks, what's left? That's the real practice. That's the part of you that watches, that breathes, that remains. Sit beside your own cracked places, not to fix, but to witness. Let them speak. Let them soften you. Let them remind you that even broken things reflect the sky. Even a bowl that holds no water can hold the Dharma. In the garden behind the old temple, there stood a stone Buddha. He had no golden crown, no ornate altar, no flowers at his feet, just stone dash, weathered by rain, wind, and decades of silence. Moss gathered at the base. Vines crept along his arm. Birds landed on his head without reverence. And still he sat, eyes closed, hands folded, unmoved. Generations of monks came and went. Some swept the garden path. Others meditated nearby. But few paid the Buddha much mind. Time had dulled his features. No one prayed to him. Tourists ignored him for the bright lacquered statues inside the main hall. He was just there, part of the background. Then one day a child arrived. She was the daughter of a villager who came to deliver vegetables. While her father spoke to the cook, the girl wandered through the herb garden, past the bell tower, until she saw the statue. Something about it made her stop. Maybe it was the silence, maybe it was the stillness, or maybe it was the dust. She reached out and touched the cheek of the statue. It felt cold, rough, real. "Who is this?" she asked when her father returned. The cook chuckled. "Just an old Buddha. No one important." But the abbot, who had been nearby, turned and smiled. "No one important?" he said softly. "Then perhaps he is teaching more than we realize." The next day, the girl returned with a cloth. She wiped the statue's face gently. The dust didn't all come off. Some of it was too stubborn, too deep. Still, she came again the next day, and the next. She brought water, polished one ear, cleaned the fold of the robe. Not to make it shine, but to see what was underneath. Each day, the Buddha seemed to return a little more, not just to sight, but to presence. Soon, other villagers took notice. A few offered flowers. One man brought a small bowl of rice. The monks watched, a bit puzzled. "This statue has always been here," said one. "Why now?" The abbot simply nodded toward the girl. "Because someone remembered him." That evening, during the Dharma talk, the abbot told a story. "Long ago," he began, "there was a temple in Thailand that housed a clay Buddha. Plain, ordinary, but during renovations a crack formed, and when monks investigated, they found gold beneath the clay." He paused. For years no one knew. Dust had hidden what was always shining. The monks were quiet. They knew he wasn't just talking about statues. "We forget," the abbot continued, "that beneath the dust of routine, of failure, of labels and years, there is gold." The girl didn't understand the full teaching, but she understood enough that something once ignored could be sacred, that what others pass by might be worth sitting with. Months passed. The Buddha still wore dust. But now it was brushed gently, not erased, just respected. His cracks weren't patched, his moss not scraped away, because the lesson was not perfection. It was presence. Years later, the girl grew older, left for school, moved to the city. But every time she returned home, she visited the statue, bowed, closed her eyes, and sat. One spring, she returned to find a small plaque had been placed beside the Buddha. It read, "Covered in dust, still whole." And beneath it, a haiku, "Stone does not forget, even as moss takes its hold." The silence remains. In the end, the statue never moved, never spoke, never sparkled, but it changed those who looked long enough, not by demanding attention, but by waiting patiently for someone to remember. that beneath the dust, nothing was ever missing. The road to Kusinara was quiet, not silent, never that, but filled with the hush of a world preparing to let go. Leaves rustled without wind. Birds called, but softly, like they too were watching. The monks walked in silence, their robes brushing against dry earth. And at the front, supported by Ananda's steady hand, walked the Buddha. His body was frail. The form that had once walked hundreds of miles barefoot, that had sat unshaken through storms, through temptation, through hunger, now trembled with every step. His ribs showed like lines drawn in dust. His shoulders drooped like branches in drought. But his eyes were clear, bright, as steady as the day he left the palace gates. They reached a grove of sal trees on the outskirts of the small village of Kusinara. The Buddha paused. "Here," he said softly, "let us rest here. This is a good place." The sal trees stood in silent formation, tall, pale, and blooming out of season, their white blossoms drifting like snow. Some monks whispered that the trees had awakened too, that nature itself knew what was coming. Ananda laid down a folded robe beneath his teacher's head. The others formed a soft ring around them, as if holding the space open, sacred and still. The Buddha reclined on his right side, in the lion's posture, facing west. His breathing was shallow but steady. The light of the setting sun turned the dust gold. "It is time," he said. "The body is like a worn cart, held together by straps and will. It has served its purpose. Let it be." Ananda knelt beside him, eyes already full of tears. "You always said not to cling," he whispered. "But I don't know how not to." The Buddha turned his gaze to his beloved attendant. "You have served with a heart free of self, Ananda, for 25 years, never once wavering. You have been my shadow in daylight, my shelter in storm. You are not losing me. You are gaining the path." Ananda bowed, his forehead to the earth. "But the world will feel so empty without your footsteps." The Buddha smiled gently. "Then fill it with your own." Word spread through Kusinara like a breeze stirring dry leaves. The Blessed One is near death. Men and women came with offerings, not of gold, but of rice, of garlands, of silence. Some stood at a distance, unable to speak. Others stepped forward and bowed low, their heads pressed to the soil. A blacksmith named Kunda came, humbly bearing a meal. A dish of mushrooms and tender greens, prepared with utmost care. The Buddha accepted it with gratitude and blessed the man. Later, as pain overtook him, he turned to Ananda. "Tell Kunda this," he said. "He should feel no regret. 2 meals in my life stand out. The first, offered by Sujata, gave strength for awakening. This one gives strength for release. Both are sacred. Both are complete." Ananda nodded, committing the words to memory. The sun dipped low. The monks gathered beneath the sal trees, their hearts heavy. Some sat in deep meditation. Others simply watched their teacher, afraid to blink. The blossoms continued to fall, gently, like the breath of the world slowing down. The Buddha opened his eyes. "Perhaps some of you think, the teacher is gone. We have no one to guide us now. But that is not so." His voice was calm, though each word required effort. "You must be your own lamps. Be a refuge unto yourselves. Take the Dharma as your island. Do not look outside for shelter." A long silence followed. Then he added, with clarity that cut through every grief, all compounded things are subject to decay. Strive with diligence. He closed his eyes and entered deep absorption, one state after another, like ripples fading across a pond, first through the four jhanas, then through the formless states, boundless space, boundless consciousness, neither perception nor non-perception, and then beyond. His breath slowed, then faded, then stopped. But the silence that followed was not empty, it was whole. The sal blossoms fell across his body. One landed gently on his brow. Ananda did not cry at first. No one did. The stillness was too vast. It reached into them. It opened a space that no sorrow could fill. A hush settled over the grove, deeper than sleep, deeper than night. Even the birds fell quiet. Even the wind held back. And then, as if cued by the moment, the sal trees swayed. Not with breeze, but with knowing, with reverence. The Blessed One had passed into parinirvana. They sat for hours, no words, no movement, just presence. Some monks touched their foreheads to the ground. Others sat upright, spine like a mountain, anchoring the grief in stillness. When finally the moon rose, round and full, like a soft eye watching from above, Ananda stood. "He is gone," he said softly, voice breaking. "No," whispered another monk, a younger one. "He is everywhere now." The cremation took place days later. They built a pyre of fragrant sandalwood, wrapped his body in layers of clean cloth and placed it with care. 8 royal families sent emissaries to claim relics, and a solemn agreement was reached. The remains would be divided equally, enshrined in stupas across the land. But the true relic was not ash. It was the teaching, the 4 noble truths, the eightfold path, the silence behind the breath, the calm behind the storm, the truth that lives on not in memory, but in practice. In time, monks and nuns would walk for weeks to reach that sal grove. Some would come in silence. Others would chant, but all would feel something shift as they stepped beneath the trees. They would sit on the earth where the Buddha last rested and listen, not for sound, but for understanding. And sometimes, if the wind was just right, they would hear it. Strive with diligence. Ananda, as the years passed, returned often. He would sit beneath the very tree where he had knelt that night. He would run his hand along its bark, worn smooth now by the prayers of many. He would remember the final gaze, the final breath, and the words that lingered after everything else had passed away. All things that arise must pass, but the path is timeless, and in the stillness there would be no fear, only peace. And so that is how he left, not in triumph, not in spectacle, but in peace, wrapped in stillness, under trees that bloomed out of season, as if even nature bowed to the one who no longer clung. And in that final moment, the world did not end. It simply continued, quieter, wiser, and forever changed. As we move deeper into the quiet teachings of Zen, we come to a story about seeing clearly and understanding true value. Listen carefully to the next story. It was the 5th night of the waxing moon. The air in Kapilavastu was still, not silent, but hushed, as though the stars had gathered at the edges of the world to listen. The palace walls breathed in jasmine and sandalwood. Lamps flickered gently. Servants whispered down the halls. And in the royal chamber, Queen Maya of the Shakya clan slept. Her breath moved softly. Her hands rested over her womb, though she did not yet know why. Outside, the moon hung high, full, radiant, unblinking. And beneath that silver light, a dream came to her. Not wild, not fevered, but clear, like water holding the shape of the moon. The dream. She found herself in a quiet grove. It was not the palace, and yet it felt familiar. There were trees, tall and old. Their trunks curved like dancers, their leaves whispering secrets from lifetimes ago. She stood barefoot, wrapped in white. No crown, no jewels, only peace. And above her, the moon glowed brighter than it ever had, a luminous pearl suspended in sky. Then the winds parted, and from the east he came. A white elephant, vast and radiant, walked across the clouds, 6 tusks curved like ivory moons. Each footstep landed without sound, as though the earth bowed beneath him. His eyes were gentle, his ears like lotus petals. His skin shimmered, not with brilliance, but with quiet power. He carried a white lotus in his trunk, and he came to her, not with force, not with haste, but with the serenity of one who knows where he is going. She did not step back. She did not fear. She simply stood and watched. And when he reached her, he bowed, as if to offer the lotus, as if to ask permission. She lowered her gaze, and in that moment, the elephant entered her side. There was no pain, only light, only warmth, as though the moon had moved into her body, as though the entire sky now rested inside her. And in that light, she saw a vision, a child, radiant, seated on a lotus, surrounded by devas and sages, stepping not into royalty, but into destiny. She saw the turning of wheels, the shifting of ages, the crumbling of illusion, and then the dream dissolved. Waking, Maya woke before the birds. The sun had not yet touched the mountains. The oil lamp beside her flickered once, then settled. The chamber was silent, but her hands, still resting over her abdomen, were warm. And her heart beat not with confusion, but with awe. She rose slowly, wrapping herself in soft cloth. She moved through the halls like moonlight and summoned her attendants. "I have seen something," she said. "Call the king, call the sages, call the dream readers and wise ones, bring the astrologers." And they came, with scrolls, with incense, with knowing eyes. She recounted every detail. The forest, the moon, the elephant, the lotus, the peace. They listened, they nodded. And at last, the eldest among them, a man with a voice like woven silk, spoke. "Your dream is not of the ordinary world. It is the sign of a great birth. The child in your womb is no ordinary prince. He will be a chakravartin, a turner of the wheel. He will change the world. If he remains in the palace, he will become a king of kings. But if he sees the sorrows of the world, he will turn from gold to truth and become a Buddha." The king placed a hand upon her shoulder, not with doubt, but with wonder. because even he, strong, worldly, wise, felt something stirring, something vast, something that had no name yet. The months. As the days passed, the kingdom watched Queen Maya with quiet reverence. Wherever she walked, flowers bloomed slightly earlier. The air around her felt cooler, gentler. Children stopped crying as she passed. Strangers bowed, unsure why. She herself changed. She laughed more easily. She wept with the songs of birds. She dreamed of stars and rivers and ancient trees. She felt the child grow, not just within her body, but as if within the world itself. And one day, near the time of birth, she asked to travel to her ancestral home. It was the tradition of her people, but more than tradition, it was a quiet longing. The king arranged everything, silks and guards, chariots and attendants. But Maya moved simply. She chose only a few companions and rode through forests and open roads beneath a sky filled with soft clouds. The birth. They stopped at Lumbini, a grove of sal trees, green and peaceful. The sun filtered through the canopy. The wind carried the scent of blossoms. Birdsong drifted like prayer. Maya stepped down, drawn to the trees. She held a branch, looked upward, and in that moment, beneath the same moon she had seen in her dream, she gave birth. The child came easily, without struggle, without fear. He did not cry. He simply opened his eyes, wide and calm. And the legends say he took 7 steps, that lotus flowers bloomed beneath each foot, that he raised one hand to the sky and one to the earth and said, "I am born for the benefit of all beings." The attendants wept. The forest fell silent, and the trees, it is said, bowed ever so slightly toward the child. Maya held him to her chest, and though she had seen him in vision, this was different. This was not dream. This was real. The warmth of skin, the weight of life, the beginning of something vast and quiet and beautiful. She did not live long after the birth. Some say it was destiny. That one who gives birth to a Buddha must return to the heavens. That her role was complete. Others say she became a guiding spirit, watching over him from a celestial realm, offering protection in moments when the path turned dark. But her presence never vanished. The child, Siddhartha, would one day walk away from his palace, would one day sit beneath a tree and awaken, would one day teach the world how to end suffering. But it began here, with a dream, with a white elephant, with a moonlit vow whispered across the veil of sleep, and with a mother who said yes, because every journey begins before we can name it. Every great awakening begins in the quiet, and sometimes the first step toward truth is a dream. A house stood at the edge of a quiet village. It wasn't grand. Its roof sagged a little. Its floorboards creaked, but the door was always open, and those who passed by often entered. One day, a traveler knocked. His shoulders were tight with worry, his breath short. He clutched his bag like it held every mistake he'd ever made. The host opened the door and smiled. "Come in," she said gently. "No judgment here, just tea and a place to rest." The next morning the traveller left, but soon another came, this time angry. Fists clenched, jaw locked. The host welcomed him too. showed him to a chair by the fire, listened to him shout, cry, fall silent, then gave him warm bread without asking why he was so upset. They kept coming. Joy danced through the garden one spring afternoon, barefoot and laughing. Grief followed days later, slow, grey, soaking wet from a sudden storm. Loneliness showed up in the middle of the night, shivering. Hope arrived unexpectedly, glowing faintly. Fear sometimes knocked twice in one day. Still, the host opened the door every time. One evening, a boy from the village asked, "Why'd you let them all in? Even the scary ones?" The host looked at the boy and said, "Because this house is a guest house, and all emotions are guests. They arrive, they stay, they leave. None of them are me." This story comes from an old Sufi poem by Rumi, beloved also in Buddhist circles. It teaches what meditation often reveals. You are not your emotions. You are the one who notices them, who makes space, who lets them pass through. Anger is not wrong. It is a guest, sometimes loud, sometimes dangerous. But it comes bearing messages, and if you slam the door in its face, it breaks in through the window. Sadness is not weakness. It is a guest. It may rearrange the furniture for a while. It may lie on the couch for days. But eventually, it moves on, especially if you sit beside it instead of pretending it isn't there. Joy too is a guest. And though it's tempting to cling to joy and beg it to stay, even joy must leave. That's okay. You can welcome it again tomorrow. The problem is not the emotions. The suffering comes when we believe they are permanent, when we build whole identities around them. I am anxious. I am unlovable. I am angry. But you are not those things. You are the house. They are just visitors. There's a story of a monk who struggled with anxiety. He tried to push it away, ignore it, meditate it into silence. Nothing worked. Until one day, his teacher said, "Stop fighting the visitor. Invite it in, serve it tea, ask it why it came." The next time anxiety returned, the monk didn't resist. He noticed his breath tightening, his chest constricting. And he whispered, "Welcome, you're here again." He didn't like it, but he didn't hate it either. He watched it, listened to it, sat with it, and slowly it softened, and eventually it left. This is what it means to live as a guest house, to offer your presence, your kindness, your non-attachment to whatever arises. It does not mean you let the guests destroy the house. It means you don't mistake them for permanent residents. You set boundaries, but not walls. You show compassion, not control. You practice presence, not possession. Sometimes guests arrive unannounced. Sometimes they slam the door. Sometimes they cry in the middle of the night. That's okay. You breathe. You listen. You stay grounded in the structure of the house. The breath, the body, the awareness that is always home. Commentary. The guest house reminds us of the temporary nature of all emotions. Nothing stays forever, no matter how intense. And by opening the door instead of guarding it with fear or shame, we reclaim something powerful. Agency. Because when you welcome a feeling, you stop being its prisoner. To be the host is not to be passive. It is to be strong, grounded, compassionate enough to say, "This too belongs, but it will not stay forever, and it is not who I am." You are not broken for feeling grief. You are not failing because fear has returned. You are not weak for missing someone. You are alive, and the guest house of aliveness is open to all visitors, even the ones that make us uncomfortable. When you practice this kind of welcoming, something beautiful happens. You stop judging others for their emotions too. You recognize their guests. You become safer, more compassionate, more real, because you've sat with your own visitors. And you know what it means to offer space. So tonight, when something arrives, a pang in your chest, a wave of sadness, a flicker of joy, pause, breathe, and ask gently, what do you need? You're welcome here. For now. Then let it pass, let it teach you, let it leave, and return to silence. At the corner of Maple and Fifth, there stood a little cafe that never advertised. No neon signs, no digital menus. Just a chalkboard easel that read, "Come in, breathe, sip slowly." Inside, the scent of cinnamon and ground espresso lingered like an old song. And behind the counter moved Raya. She didn't move quickly, not because she was lazy, but because every motion mattered. Scoop, steam, pour, wipe. A rhythm of care, repeated hundreds of times a day. Customers noticed. They came stressed, hurried, multitasking, but left quieter. Because somehow, even in the rush of morning lines, Raya made you feel like time had paused. She wore no uniform, only soft linen aprons and a tiny brass bell around her wrist. It didn't jingle constantly. Just gently, when she turned or wiped the counter or placed a mug just right. A small sound, but intentional. One day, a man asked her, "What's the bell for? Aesthetic?" Raya smiled. "It's a reminder," she said, "to return to the moment." The bell had come from a monastery in Korea, a gift from a traveling monk who had passed through one rainy morning, soaked to the bone, but smiling like the clouds had kissed him. He'd ordered chamomile tea, sat for an hour, said nothing, and when he left, he gave her the bell. "For your practice," he had whispered. At first, she didn't know what he meant. But over time, she came to understand. Every chime was a callback. Back to the steam rising from the milk. Back to the texture of ceramic under her fingertips. Back to the presence of the person in front of her. One regular, a nurse named Ellie, used to joke, "You're the only person who can make caffeine feel calming." Raya just laughed, but she knew why. It wasn't the coffee, it was the attention. The Buddha once said, "When walking, just walk. When sitting, just sit. Above all, don't wobble." Raya lived that. In a world addicted to wobbling. One afternoon, a man burst in, frantic. His phone had died. He was late for a pitch. He spilled his order twice in his rush. But Raya didn't scold. She simply placed the cup on the counter slowly. Her bell chimed. He paused, looked up. And in that pause, he breathed. It lasted only a second, but it was enough. Presence doesn't need hours. It needs moments, noticed fully. Years passed. The cafe stayed small, never franchised, never changed hands, but its walls soaked in thousands of quiet returns. One morning, Raya didn't show up. A handwritten sign appeared. "Back in 3 days, practicing stillness." Customers waited, and when she returned, they smiled, because somehow her absence had reminded them. Even a barista needs to refill the cup. The bell still chimed, still soft, still enough. A sound that said, "You're here, be here." With each step on the Zen path, a new lesson unfolds. Now we turn to a story about recognition, of self, of others, and of what truly matters. Listen carefully to the next story. The forest welcomed him, but not with comfort. It offered no shade from questions, no warmth from familiarity. Siddhartha had left behind the silk and gold of palace life, and now walked among wandering seekers, mendicants, and sages whose ribs showed like cages, and whose eyes glimmered with discipline or delusion. He sought teachers, and they welcomed him, for his mind was sharp and his determination pure. He studied with Arada Kalama, who taught of the formless meditative realms, places where consciousness floated like light on still water. Siddhartha followed his teachings, and with silent breath and sharpened focus, he reached those plains. His mind became spacious. His thoughts slowed like clouds drifting across a still lake. For hours, even days, he remained in deep absorption, untouched by fear, untouched by want. But when he opened his eyes, he saw the truth. Though his body was still, suffering had not ended. The world remained the same. Hunger still visited the poor. Age still bent the backs of farmers. Death still came to children and kings alike. He bowed to Arada Kalama with gratitude and moved on. Next, he studied with Udaka Ramaputta, who taught of neither perception nor non-perception, of the vast nothingness that lay beyond all forms. Siddhartha once again followed, and again he reached the heights. He learned to let go of sensation, of even the thought of self. He floated, as if beyond the skin of the world. But again, when his eyes opened, the truth remained. Desire still lingered. Aging still came. Death still waited. He thanked his teachers, bowed with reverence, and walked on. He had reached the highest peaks of mind. He had sat in the palace of consciousness. And still, he had not seen freedom. In a grove beside the Niranjana river, he found a band of 5 ascetics who practiced fierce austerity. They believed that the body must be conquered by pain, that by starving it, punishing it, mastering its cravings, one could burn away desire and illusion. Siddhartha joined them. He ate but 1 grain of rice a day. He chewed each grain for long minutes until it dissolved like a breath. He slept in the open, through storm and frost, curled against the roots of trees, his robe no thicker than air. He held his breath until his vision blurred and his head rang with wind. His limbs withered. His skin clung to his bones like silk over stone. His hair fell in clumps, and birds perched near him, thinking him a branch. He listened only to silence. He welcomed pain. He thought it would purify him, but the fire of truth did not rise. He could silence the body. He could silence even the mind, but the ache remained. The ache that asked, why do we suffer? Why do we cling? What ends the endless turning of sorrow? One day, as he bathed in the river, he collapsed from weakness. The water barely reached his knees, yet his strength failed him. His vision dimmed, the world tilted. A young girl named Sujata saw him and, moved by compassion, offered him a bowl of rice milk. Her hands trembled as she knelt before him, unsure if he was a spirit or a dying man. The milk was warm. the grains soft. As it passed his lips, his body stirred, not with indulgence, but with remembrance. The body was not the enemy, nor was the world. In that moment, clarity dawned. This was not failure, this was insight. Neither indulgence in luxury, nor torment of the flesh had freed him. He had lived both extremes. He had walked both shores, and both had kept him bound. He would walk the middle way, not soft and yielding, nor rigid and cruel, not drowned in pleasure, nor crushed by pain, but steady, balanced, awake. He stood and walked back to the grove. The 5 ascetics saw the softness in his step, the colour in his cheeks, and they scorned him. He has abandoned the path, they whispered. He has turned back to comfort. But Siddhartha knew better. He did not argue. He did not explain. He simply bowed and walked on. At the edge of the forest stood a great fig tree whose roots plunged deep and whose branches reached like arms toward the sky. Siddhartha looked upon it and knew, here he would sit, here he would wait. He gathered dry grass for a seat. He placed his back to the tree. He crossed his legs, rested his hands in his lap, and drew a deep, even breath. He made a vow, though my skin withers, though my bones turn to dust, I will not rise from this seat until I find the end of suffering. The sun passed. The moon rose. Birds quieted. Winds stilled. And in the silence the battle began, not with sword or shield, but with doubt and memory, fear and illusion. But that was the next story. For now he sat, still, the seeker who had tasted every path, now ready to look within. The next chapter had begun. Every morning at 6:15 she opened the curtains. The light crept in slowly, soft and golden, and the photo on the mantel caught it just right. It was old, sepia-toned, edges curled like leaves in autumn. A man in uniform, smiling, handsome, still young. Her husband, gone now for 17 years. Miriam never moved the photo. It stayed on the same spot. 3rd tile from the right, 2 inches from the lamp. She didn't talk to it, didn't cry over it. She simply saw it. Every day. Grief for her had stopped being a storm. It had become weather, something you dress for, something you feel without needing to fight. Once, her granddaughter asked, "Why don't you get rid of that old photo? You have better ones on your phone." Miriam just smiled. That one isn't for looking. It's for remembering. Her husband had died in his sleep. No warnings, no pain, just silence. She found him in the morning, hands still curled as if holding a dream. She didn't scream, didn't collapse. She sat beside him, held his hand and whispered, "Thank you." People told her to be strong. She didn't try. She simply continued. At the temple nearby, the monks would speak of impermanence, of how everything changes, how attachment creates suffering. Miriam understood this. Not as an idea, but as a reality. She loved her husband deeply, but she did not clutch him. Even in his absence, she let him be gone. And in doing so, he never truly left. There's a Zen teaching. To hold a butterfly, you must open your palm. Miriam didn't keep a shrine, didn't tell his story over and over. She just lived in a way that would make him proud. She tended the garden they once planted together. She drank the coffee he used to brew. She folded his shirts one last time and gave them away. Not because she stopped loving him, but because she didn't want her love to become a cage. One day, a neighbor lost her husband. She came to Miriam, eyes red, voice shaking. "I don't know how to live without him." Miriam poured tea, sat with her, said nothing at first, then quietly offered, "You don't live without him. You live with the part of him that still breathes in you." The neighbor sobbed. And Miriam did not stop her. She just placed a hand on hers. "And let it be. Love doesn't end. It changes shape. And grief, too, is a form of love. One that knows how to bow." Miriam is older now, hands soft with age. Memories flickering at the edges, but she still opens the curtains each morning. Still lets the light find the photo, not to bring him back, but to let him go again, gently, lovingly, without holding. The forest was silent. A slow dawn brushed the canopy with gold, and the earth exhaled the cool breath of night. Beneath the tall trees, a single figure sat unmoving, his presence vast, his stillness deeper than the roots below him. This was Samantabhadra, the bodhisattva of great action. Where Avalokiteshvara hears the cries of the world, Samantabhadra responds, not just with compassion, but with commitment, with vow, with doing. In Sanskrit, his name means universal worthy. He is the embodiment of enlightened action, not theoretical, but lived. In temples across East Asia, he is depicted riding a white elephant with 6 tusks, each representing one of the 6 paramitas, perfections of a bodhisattva: generosity, discipline, patience, vigor, meditation, wisdom. The elephant is steady, strong, humble. It does not race. It carries, because the path of action is not haste. It is devotion. Samantabhadra is not remembered for miracles. He is remembered for vows. In the Avatamsaka Sutra, a vision of infinite Buddhas and worlds, he stands before countless beings and declares, "I vow to honor all Buddhas, to make offerings, to confess mistakes, to rejoice in goodness, to request teaching, to stay in the world, to follow the path, to live for others, to turn the wheel of Dharma, to dedicate all merit for the awakening of all beings." 10 vast vows, 10 immeasurable currents of action. And still, he made more, because Samantabhadra's compassion does not stop at feeling, it becomes form. There's a story told in the mountains of Sichuan. A wandering monk came to a temple where the image of Samantabhadra stood tall, ornate, golden, seated atop the elephant. The monk bowed, then whispered, "Great Bodhisattva, what is your practice?" And in his mind, a voice replied, "Whatever brings benefit, I do it." The monk frowned. "But how do I know what will help?" The voice was soft. "When your mind forgets the self, every step becomes service." This is the heart of Samantabhadra, not just knowing what is good, but doing it, even when tired, even when no one sees, even when the benefit is invisible. Some bodhisattvas sit in meditation, others speak sutras. Samantabhadra cleans the floor, carries the sick, plants trees he will never see grow, because his practice is not abstract. It is bodily, it is effort, and it is choice. In the West, we often associate wisdom with silence, stillness, detachment. But Mahayana Buddhism offers a different view. That wisdom and action are not separate. That the awakened mind moves, not compulsively, but naturally, like water down a mountain. Samantabhadra teaches, if you bow, bow completely. If you eat, eat with gratitude. If you work, work with your whole body. If you vow, live the vow. A novice once asked a Zen master, "What is the most advanced form of practice?" The master pointed to the broom, then to the rice pot, then to the novice's own worn sandals. "Whatever needs doing," he said, "do it completely." In this way, Samantabhadra is not lofty. He is practical. He does not ask you to fly. He asks you to stay grounded and keep going, to help even one being, to smile even once for someone who is suffering, to remember that in a single action, sweeping, bowing, cooking, there can be immeasurable merit when done with a mind of service. There's a teaching. A bodhisattva never asks, "Will this be noticed?" A bodhisattva asks, "Does this help?" In modern life, we are busy. We're taught to measure action by its results, but Samantabhadra teaches boundless action, where the result is not yours to keep, where the act itself is enough. Where planting a seed you'll never see flower is not foolish. It is sacred. Commentary. Samantabhadra is not a figure on a pedestal. He is a mirror. He shows us that enlightenment is not an escape from the world. It is a return to it, fully awake, with sleeves rolled, with hands open, with vows not recited but lived. The white elephant is not fast, but it is strong. It does not seek applause. It just walks, one foot after the other, one act after the next, and the bodhisattva upon it smiles. Because every breath is part of the vow. To follow Samantabhadra is not to be perfect. It is to be willing, to step forward, to show up, to fall down, and vow again. Because the path is long, but every step walked in service becomes joy. As our exploration of Zen Buddhism deepens, let us listen to a story that reveals how true worth is often overlooked. Here starts the next story. The novice stepped forward, eyes low, robes gathered neatly in his arms. He had heard whispers of the great master Joshu, of his clarity, of his presence, of the way his words, brief, sharp, could undo years of illusion in a single moment. And so, the novice came with a question, simple, ancient, and burning. He bowed deeply. "Does a dog have Buddha nature?" Joshu looked at him, quiet as a still pond, then said, "Moo." Just that. One word, moo. The novice blinked. He had expected a teaching, a parable, perhaps even a sermon on interdependence or karma. But all he got was this one syllable, moo. Number not no, as in rejection, but moo, as in as in empty, as in beyond yes or no. The novice opened his mouth to speak again, to clarify, to plead for context. But Joshu had already returned to trimming the bonsai. And the novice was left standing there, holding a question that would not let go. Does a dog have Buddha nature? In the Mahayana tradition, the answer is yes. All beings have Buddha nature, even the smallest ant, even the vilest criminal, even the barking dog on the dusty street. The Heart Sutra says, form is emptiness. Emptiness is form. So why did Joshu say mu? It wasn't to contradict the sutras, it was to shock the mind out of seeking answers like stones in a riverbed. For weeks, the novice could not sleep. He replayed the moment again and again. He wrote MU in his journal. He whispered it during walking meditation. He shouted it into the wind. He carried it like a thorn in the foot, every step made sharper by its presence. One night, a senior monk approached him in the meditation hall. "Why do you look so troubled?" he asked. The novice bowed his head. "Master Joshu gave me a koan. Does a dog have Buddha nature?" He said, "Moo! I don't understand." The monk smiled gently. "You won't." "Not yet." The novice frowned. "Then what should I do?" "Burn your logic," said the monk, "and sit." In the centuries that followed, Joshu's Mu became the first koan in the Gateless Gate, a collection of paradoxical encounters meant to tear open the mind. And it is said that some monks meditated on Mu for 5 years, 10, even 20. Not because the question was hard, but because the answer required the death of the one asking it. Mu is not a word, it is a doorway, but it has no latch, no hinges, no frame. Only a gate that exists because the mind insists there must be one. And the moment you stop trying to walk through it, it disappears. The novice became obsessed. He stopped eating. He stopped speaking. He carried Mu through every moment like a fever dream. He touched it while pouring tea. He chewed it like rice. He sat with it in the dark until the wind outside sounded like it was chanting back to him. "M, m, m." He began to tremble. And still, no clarity, no breakthrough, only silence. One dawn, after 300 days of silent retreat, he broke. He stood in the rain, lifted his head to the grey sky, and shouted, "What is Mu?" The sound echoed against the temple walls. A bird fluttered. A branch creaked, but nothing answered. He fell to his knees, not in defeat, in surrender, not to ignorance, but to not knowing. And in that moment, he let go, not just of the question, but of the one who needed the answer. And that's when it happened. Not a flash, not a thunderclap, just a quiet shift, a falling away, and everything returned. The wind, the breath, the feeling of water on his skin, the sound of a dog barking in the distance. Nothing extraordinary, and yet everything was different. He stood, he laughed, he bowed. Later, when the novice returned to Joshu, the master asked no questions. He looked once in the monk's eyes and simply said, "Good." Nothing more, because no explanation was needed. You cannot explain Mu, you can only become it. Commentary. In Western terms, we often ask, is it this or that? Zen asks, who is asking? Joshu's Mu is not a negation of the dog's Buddha nature. It is a negation of the very framework of the question. To ask, does a dog have Buddha nature, is to separate Buddha nature from dog, to assume that it's something a being might possess. But Buddha nature is not a possession. It is not a label. It is the breath before thought, the space before division. Mu is the erasure of the chalkboard before the question is even written. Zen does not want you to answer the question. It wants the question to consume you. Until there's nothing left. Until only presence remains. Until even mu is forgotten. And the wind in the pines is enough. The gateless gate is open to all. But to pass through, you must stop trying to pass. You must stop searching for the latch. There is no mu outside yourself. It is not in the words of sutras, not in the mind's debate. It is here, now, when all seeking stops and the moment is allowed to be, just as it is. Even a barking dog, even your own confusion, even the silence after reading this sentence. It started like any other Monday. The inbox blinked with urgency. 142 unread. A blinking red light on the office phone. Calendar blocks stacked like bricks. Slack notifications multiplying like rabbits in spring. Julian sipped lukewarm coffee and took a deep breath. Then he dove in. He was efficient, smart, reliable, they called him. Always responsive. Always ready. Always tired. Somewhere between the 7th reply and the 4th Zoom call, he noticed his chest tightening. Nothing sharp, just a quiet constriction. A warning, like a traffic light blinking yellow. But he kept going, because the world rewarded output. And silence. Silence didn't show up on KP Is. By 4 p.m., his eyes burned. By 6 p.m., he was still typing. He didn't hear the rain start, didn't notice the tea growing cold beside his keyboard, until a calendar reminder popped up. Meditation class, 6:30 p.m., room 4B. He had signed up weeks ago, half joking, a resolution maybe. He almost closed the tab, but something, maybe the silence behind the noise, nudged him. Room 4B was warm, soft lighting, folded cushions, a bell. Only 6 people sat in the circle. A woman at the front, maybe late 40s, calm-eyed, greeted him with a nod, not words. "Sit however you like," she said. Julian sat stiffly, still in his button-up, still full of digital momentum. The teacher closed her eyes, spoke gently. Let the inbox go. Let the to-do list drop its grip. Notice the breath, that's all. Julian's mind raced. The Henderson file, the Q4 budget, the message he forgot to reply to. But the bell rang again, soft and clear, like a sound not trying to impress anyone. And slowly, his thoughts became less sticky. After 20 minutes, she said, "Busy is not always bad, but sometimes it's a way of avoiding stillness. Ask yourself, what would I hear if I stopped pretending I didn't have time to listen?" Julian felt something twist. Not painfully, just honestly. Because beneath the notifications and meetings and perfectly managed chaos was a quiet voice he hadn't heard in years. It didn't ask for much, just a pause, a breath, a life lived on purpose, not just performed. That night, he walked home in the rain. No umbrella, no rush. Each raindrop felt like punctuation in a sentence he had forgotten how to read. The next morning, his inbox was just as full, but he didn't open it right away. He brewed tea, sat for 5 minutes, watched the steam rise and disappear. And in those 5 minutes, he remembered he was alive, not just employed. Julian didn't quit his job, didn't move to the mountains. He still answered emails, still ran meetings. But once a day, he closed the laptop, turned off the noise, and let the silence speak. The Buddha never warned about email, but he did say, "Better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace." Sometimes peace is not found in responding faster. It's found in not responding at all, at least for a moment. The baby arrived in the middle of the night. Wrapped in a tattered blanket, cheeks flushed with cold, it was placed on the doorstep of the small mountain temple. When the monk opened the door, he found only the child and a young couple trembling in the shadows. The girl clutched her shawl. Her eyes were swollen from crying. "This child is yours," she said. "You are the father." The monk, Hakuin Ikaku, did not argue. He did not protest. He did not explain. He only looked at the baby, then at the girl, and said softly, "Is that so?" In town, the scandal bloomed like wildfire. Hakuin, the respected monk, the teacher, the silent one, had seduced a local girl. People spat at the ground when they passed him. Merchants whispered behind their hands. Disciples left the temple in shame. Still, Hakuin said nothing. He carried water. He chopped wood. He fed the child with one hand and stirred rice with the other. Winter passed, then spring. The baby grew, laughed, cried, teethed on the corner of Hakuin's robe. And still, the townspeople looked on with judgment. And still Hakuin said nothing. Only that same phrase when asked, "Is that so?" A year passed. The girl returned, eyes lowered, voice trembling. She fell to her knees before Hakuin. "I lied," she said. "It was not you. I was afraid. I blamed you." The crowd had gathered now. Some gasped, some hung their heads. She wept and reached for the child. "I'm sorry. I came to take him home." And Hakuin? He held out the child gently and said, "Is that so?" This is one of the most beloved stories in Zen, not for its drama, but for its stillness, for the way Hakuin held the center, unmoved by praise or blame. He did not fight the accusation. He did not defend his name. He did not collapse under judgment. He simply met life as it came. In the West, we are taught to guard our reputations, to clarify, to prove, to explain. But Zen sees the self as a construct, a house of cards built from opinions, images, and roles. And so, Hakuin let his fall, willingly, without resistance. To many, this seems weak, unwise. But in truth, it takes immense strength to say, "Let them think what they will, I remain." Not in apathy, but in presence. Because the ego is loud, but truth is quiet. Hakuin's phrase, "Is that so?" is not sarcasm. It is not indifference. It is a bow to the unpredictability of life, to its mess, its reversals, its harshness and grace. It is the refusal to cling to any label, hero or villain, saint or sinner, right or wrong. There's a famous Zen saying, "Praise and blame are like the wind. To follow them is to be tossed about like a leaf. To stand firm is to become a tree." Hakuin was a tree, rooted, silent, alive. In private moments he may have wept. He may have watched the baby sleep and wondered why the world twists so easily. But his practice was clear. Do not grasp, do not reject, receive each moment, and respond not with reactivity, but with integrity. What would you do if someone lied about you? If the world turned against you? If your name became a weapon? Could you breathe? Could you hold the pain without making it your identity? Could you say, "Is that so?" and keep walking? There's another layer to this story. By taking the child in, Hakuin protected the girl. He absorbed her shame, held her fear, became her shield. Not out of guilt, but out of compassion. And when the truth came, he did not demand apology. He did not say, "I told you so." He returned the child like a leaf to the wind. Because Zen asks nothing of others, only this: be fully present and let go. Commentary. In the modern world, everyone is watching, commenting, interpreting, and we're trained to manage perception, to curate our story. But Hakuin reminds us, your life is not what others say. It is what you do when no one understands you, when you're misread, blamed, dismissed. That is where your practice begins. Hakuin did not defend his innocence, because truth does not need defense. It needs stillness. It needs the refusal to flinch. When asked later why he took the child in, Hakuin said, "Because the child needed care, and the girl needed mercy, and the temple needed the Dharma to be lived." No scripture, no debate, just rice, sleep, warmth, and the ability to say yes to life, even when it doesn't make sense. Is that so? Is not an answer. It's an opening, a breath before reacting. A choice to not fight the river, but to float, eyes open, and maybe even smile. Continuing along the path of Zen insight, we pause now to hear a teaching about perception and hidden value. Listen carefully to the next story. There was once a kingdom where wisdom was prized like gold. Rulers held counsel with monks. Children learned not only how to count, but how to think. And among its most respected voices was a wandering teacher known simply as the Buddha. He did not wear jewels, he did not shout, but when he spoke, even the birds seemed to pause. And one day, in the town square of a village nestled near the banks of the Ganges, he told a story. Not to entertain, but to reveal. The dispute began with laughter, then sharp words. A group of scholars, each confident in his own tradition, had come to debate. Some were Brahmins, others were ascetics. A few belonged to newer sects, filled with fiery conviction and scrolls still smelling of fresh ink. They spoke of truth, of soul, of self, of afterlife, of permanence, of nothingness. Each man insisted his view was the whole, complete, correct. The others, misguided, foolish, dangerous. They argued beneath a fig tree, loud enough that passers-by turned to look. A merchant chuckled, a potter shook his head, a child pointed and whispered, "They sound like crows fighting over the same grain." When the Buddha arrived, he did not interrupt. He simply sat and waited until their voices began to falter, some from exhaustion, some from shame. And into that space, He placed his voice like a drop of water on a still pond. "There was once a king," the Buddha began, "who summoned 6 men born blind since birth." The scholars fell quiet. The king told them, "I will allow you to encounter something magnificent. Tell me what it is." The blind men were curious, eager. They were led one by one to a massive animal they had never known, a mighty elephant. Each man was guided to touch a different part. The first reached out and felt the flank. He pressed his palms against its broad, warm side and declared, "Ah, an elephant is like a wall, wide and unmoving." The second grasped the tusk, smooth and curved like polished stone. "No, no," he said. "An elephant is like a spear, sharp and strong." The third took hold of the trunk, which coiled and shifted in his arms. "You're both wrong. It is like a snake, alive, twisting, breathing." The fourth felt the knee, round and solid. "Clearly, it is like a tree trunk," he announced, "thick and rooted." The fifth wrapped his hands around the ear, which flapped gently like a fan. "You are mistaken. An elephant is a large fan, waving back and forth." The last man touched the tail, thin and rope-like. "No, no, it's a rope. A coarse, swaying rope." When they were brought back together, the king asked, "Well, what is an elephant?" And the shouting began. Each man insisted he was right. Each accused the others of ignorance. Each swore he had touched the truth with his own hands. And in a way, they had. The Buddha paused. The scholars sat frozen, the parable hanging in the air like incense smoke. Each man, he said, encountered only a part. Each was sincere, each described what he felt, and yet none saw the whole. He looked at each scholar now, gently, without judgment. "So it is with many truths. You may touch a piece and call it the whole, but when clinging to fragments, conflict follows." One of the younger scholars frowned. "But teacher," he said slowly, "does that mean there is no truth?" The Buddha smiled, not to mock, but to soften. "Number, it means that truth is vast, and the mind must be vast to hold it. One who sees the trunk and believes it is a snake is not lying, but he is also not seeing clearly." Another monk, one who had remained quiet through the debate, bowed. "And what, Blessed One, is the way to see the whole?" The Buddha turned his palm upward, a gesture of openness. "Humility, listening, letting go of the need to be right. When you stop clinging to your peace, you make space for someone else's. And in that space, something greater may arise." The fig tree rustled gently above them. A breeze passed through the square. The tension had broken. One of the elders leaned forward. His voice was softer now. "I have spent my life defending what I thought was the whole elephant, but now I wonder if I have only touched the tail." The Buddha nodded. "Then you are further along the path than many who still cling to the tusk." That night, as lamps flickered in the homes of the village, the story travelled from mouth to mouth. Children reenacted the blind men, bumping into trees and miming trunks and tails. Elders sat in circles, wondering what part they had touched in their own lives, what truths they had guarded too tightly. And in one small home, a young girl asked her grandmother, What does the whole elephant look like? The old woman smiled. We may never know for sure, she said. But if we all share what we felt, maybe we can come closer. And so, the parable of the blind men and the elephant was passed on, not as a warning against belief, but as an invitation to perspective, to listen, to learn, to let go of the walls we build around our understanding. Centuries later, the story would still be told, in temples, in schools, in circles of debate and doubt. And always, it would whisper the same truth. No one sees everything, but together we can see more. Before time was measured by stars, before mountains were named, before the sutras had been spoken, there was a vow. A single vow, whispered not to the heavens, but to the suffering of the world. I will not enter nirvana until all beings are free. This was the vow of Avalokiteshvara, the bodhisattva of compassion, not a god, not a savior, but a being who heard the cries of the world and stayed. In Sanskrit, his name means the one who hears the sounds of the world. In China, he is Guanyin, the one who listens. In Tibet, Chenrezig, the gentle-eyed protector. In Japan, Kannon, the goddess with a gaze like soft rain. He takes many forms, male, female, neither, all, because compassion is not bound by gender. It is a response, a presence, a hand that reaches out before the mind decides whether or not to help. The story begins long ago in the celestial realms where Avalokiteshvara practiced deeply and tirelessly. Lifetime after lifetime, he worked to free beings from suffering. He taught, he healed, he carried, he wept, and still the suffering did not end. Every time a life was soothed, 10 more were in pain. Every time one was saved, another was lost. One day, Avalokiteshvara stood at the edge of reality and looked down upon the world. He heard every cry, every mother losing a child, every man begging for bread, every animal caught in a trap, every being trapped in anger, desire, confusion. And in that moment, his heart broke. Not figuratively, it shattered. His body split into pieces, his head burst into 11 parts, his arms cracked and fell. His vow seemed too vast, the pain of others too great. And from the silence that followed, he wept. I have failed, he whispered. I cannot save them all. But the universe listens in strange ways, and just as Avalokiteshvara reached the edge of despair, a light appeared. Amida Buddha, the Buddha of infinite light, came forth, gently, patiently, lovingly. He gathered the pieces. He said nothing of failure, only this: you broke not from weakness, but because your compassion was real. And with a soft breath, Amida blessed Avalokiteshvara's broken form and transformed it. Now he had 11 heads to see in every direction and 1,000 arms, each with an eye in its palm to both see and act. Hands that could reach into every corner of the world. Hands that could soothe, protect, feed, carry, hold, mend. Not all hands were soft. Some held weapons to cut through illusion. Others held lotus flowers to cradle the broken. Some formed mudras of peace. Others reached out with empty palms. Each hand was compassion expressed. Each hand was love in action. This is why Avalokiteshvara did not abandon the world, because even in despair, he did not turn away, because real compassion isn't about success. It's about showing up again and again, even when it seems hopeless, especially when it seems hopeless. There's a story told in temples. A monk once asked a master, "What is Avalokiteshvara doing with so many arms and eyes?" The master replied, "It's like a man reaching for a pillow in the night. He does it without thinking." That is the heart of compassion. No calculation, no pride, just the instinct to help. Because suffering is not theoretical. It is immediate, and so compassion must be too. In the iconography, each hand of Avalokiteshvara holds a symbol: a wheel, a bell, a jewel, a book, a rope, a vajra, a bowl, a tear. Because compassion wears many forms. Sometimes it's guidance, sometimes it's protection, sometimes it's nourishment, sometimes it's just being with someone who is grieving without fixing it. In one form, Avalokiteshvara appears with only two hands. One holds a lotus, symbol of purity rising from the mud. The other holds a vase, pouring the nectar of healing into the world. Because even with just two hands, if moved by compassion, you can save lives. In the Mahayana tradition, to walk the bodhisattva path is to walk in Avalokiteshvara's footsteps, to take the vow, not for glory, not for escape, but for others, for the one crying next door, for the stranger across the world, for the part of yourself still in pain. There's a saying, when compassion truly arises, there is no I helping you, only the act itself. That is Avalokiteshvara, not a being to worship, but a mirror, a reminder of what you already are. When you listen with your whole body, when you act before being asked, when you feel another's pain like your own and still choose to love, you become one of the 1,000 hands. Commentary. This story is not mythology, it's instruction. You may not have 1,000 arms, but you have one. You may not have an eye in every palm, but you have awareness, and that is enough. Avalokiteshvara broke not from weakness, but from caring too much, and instead of being punished for it, he was expanded. His brokenness became his beauty. His sorrow became his vow. So if you ever feel too tender for this world, if you feel like your heart breaks too easily, you are not broken. You are awakening. You are listening. You are already walking the path of Avalokiteshvara. The monsoon rains had passed, and the forest paths of Kosambi steamed with quiet life. Leaves dripped with silver beads. Frogs croaked low from the shadows. And above it all, the scent of wet bark and jasmine lingered like breath held too long. Under a canopy of tall sal trees, the Buddha sat surrounded by monks. They had walked for days to gather here. Some were old, most were young, their robes still crisp from devotion, their minds still sharp with questions. And today, the Blessed One had agreed to speak, not of morality, nor of meditation, but of something far subtler, of misunderstanding. He began, not with pronouncement, but with silence. Then, as the breeze shifted through the trees, he spoke. "There are those," he said, "who come to the Dharma like a man searching for a serpent. A few monks glanced up. Serpents were no small matter in these woods, slender and swift, some deadly, some divine. This man, the Buddha continued, is told that a snake dwells near the roots of a great tree, so he goes into the forest to catch it. But he does not learn the proper way. He does not bring a forked stick. He does not wait for the right moment. He sees movement in the grass and lunges with bare hands. A few younger monks leaned forward. "What happens?" one whispered. The Buddha's gaze passed over them like moonlight on water. He seizes the snake by the tail. A ripple of discomfort passed through the listeners. "And the snake," he said, "twists and strikes." He paused. "And so it is with those who take hold of the Dharma wrongly, grasping at the tail, not understanding the nature of what they hold. And when it turns against them, they blame the teaching, never seeing that it was their own hand that erred." Silence fell again. It was not a parable to soothe, but to stir. For many in that circle had studied hard, memorized discourses, debated with pride. They recited verses in the marketplace, corrected others in the villages, and took satisfaction in knowing the words of the Buddha by heart. But the words were not the snake, and the Buddha knew it. A senior monk, Kakana, bowed his head and asked softly, "Blessed One, how does one hold the Dharma correctly?" The Buddha nodded. "Imagine," he said, "a man crossing a river. The current is swift, the far bank promises safety, and he finds no boat, no bridge. So he gathers branches, grass, and reeds. He binds them tightly. He makes a raft." The monks followed, some nodding. With effort, he crosses the water. And when he reaches the other shore, does he carry the raft on his back for the rest of the journey? A few smiled. A few looked unsure. "No," said the Buddha. "He leaves it behind, grateful, respectful, but he does not cling to it. He let that image hang in the warm, moist air. So too is the Dharma," he said, "a raft to cross, not a burden to bear forever, not a weapon to strike others, not a badge to wear." A soft murmur of recognition passed through the monks. "But some," he continued, "treat the Dharma as the man who grabs the snake's tail. They take hold of words, of verses, of rules, not to cross the river, but to shout from the shore." He turned his palm upward. "They say, 'I know,' you do not. They say, 'This is the only way, yours is wrong.' They say, 'I have read, I have memorized, I have mastered.'" He paused. "But what have they understood?" A breeze stirred the forest floor. A leaf spiraled down like a question with no answer. "Understanding," he said, "is not repetition. Wisdom is not memorization, and truth is not a prize to be clutched." He looked at them all. "Do not seize the tail. Learn how the snake moves. Watch, be still, approach with care. Grasp rightly, not to own, but to understand." A young novice, no older than 15, raised his hand timidly. "But Blessed One," he said, "what if one clings to the raft out of reverence, out of gratitude?" The Buddha smiled gently. "Reverence is not the same as attachment," he said. "Gratitude flows like a river. Clinging dams the stream." He folded his hands in his lap. "To let go does not mean to forget. It means to honor the purpose, and move on when it has been fulfilled. Several monks bowed. Some looked thoughtful, others uneasy, for the teaching had pierced the pride of many. A monk named Sati, known for his keen memory and rigid interpretations, frowned. "But Lord," he said, "should we not defend the Dharma from false views?" "Yes," said the Buddha without hesitation. "But first, defend it from misunderstanding within yourself. A man who argues from ego may win the debate and lose the path." He looked directly at Sati. "If you know a verse, but use it to shame another, you have caught the tail." He turned to the group once more. "If you teach to elevate yourself, you have caught the tail. If you study only to be praised, you have caught the tail. If you hold to rules to feel superior, you have caught the tail. And if you mistake knowledge for wisdom, you have caught the tail." The forest was utterly still now. Even the birds had quieted. "And when the snake turns and bites," the Buddha asked, "you will say the Dharma is false, that it failed you, that it was sharp, cruel, or useless, but the snake was never to blame." A few monks bowed their heads in shame. One of the older mendicants, seated on a mat of grass near the front, exhaled deeply. "I have clutched many tails in my time," he said, "but now I wish only to learn how to see clearly." The Buddha nodded. That is the beginning of wisdom. That evening, as twilight turned the forest gold, the monks moved quietly through the camp. No chants, no debates, just footsteps and thought. Sati sat alone by the fire, his manuscript scrolls untouched. The novice who had asked about the raft sat beside him, quiet, respectful. Sati turned and whispered, "I used to think that knowing every word would make me wise." The boy looked at him. "And now?" Sati stared at the flames. "Now I wonder if I even know how to listen." In the stillness of the forest, the words of the Buddha echoed like a distant bell. "Do not grasp the tail, learn how the snake moves." And in the hearts of those who truly listened, the Dharma shed its scales of pride, of certainty, of rigid form, and began, at last, to breathe. As we drift deeper into the still waters of Zen, a quiet teaching begins to rise, one that speaks of clarity and of value not always seen. Listen gently now. The next story begins. A monk once asked his teacher, "Master, where does the path to enlightenment begin?" The teacher did not answer. Instead, he stood up, walked across the room, and swept the floor. Later that night, the monk asked again, "Then where does it end?" The teacher looked up from pouring tea and said, "If it ends, it was never the way." This is the story of non-arrival, the path that unfolds not to get somewhere, but to be fully where you are. Long ago, in a forest monastery, a wandering monk arrived seeking answers. He had studied every scripture, debated with scholars, and meditated in caves for years. And yet, he felt restless, incomplete, as if truth always lived just beyond the next bend. He bowed to the abbot and said, "I have walked many roads. I seek the one that leads to awakening." The abbot nodded and replied, "Very well. Walk with me tomorrow at dawn." The next morning, they walked. Through bamboo groves, past quiet ponds, up rocky trails where mist clung to the earth like breath. They walked all day, The monk said little. By dusk, they had returned to where they started. The monk frowned. "You promised to show me the path." The abbot said, "I did. We walked it." The monk blinked. "But we arrived nowhere." The abbot smiled. "Exactly." The student wanted something linear, a goal, a peak. A moment where the sky split open and declared, "Here it is." But the Dharma is not a destination. It is the walking itself. It is the attention you give to each step, the space between one breath and the next. The Buddha did not climb a holy mountain to reach truth. He sat under a tree and stopped seeking. You do not become awake like winning a race. You remember the truth that was always here. Under the hurry, beneath the striving, inside the stillness of the now. When we think of progress, we think forward, farther, better, beyond. But what if the path moves deeper, not farther, inward, not onward? Like returning to the place you began, but seeing it clearly for the first time. The monk eventually understood. He stopped chasing high teachings, stopped measuring his worth by distance traveled. He began to walk slowly. He bowed to doorways, thanked his bowl before eating, washed his feet with care, and in those simple moments, something softened, something opened. There's a Zen saying, "Before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water." The tasks do not change, but the one doing them no longer seeks to arrive. He is already home. In the end, the way is not mystical. It is making tea without rushing. It is folding robes with full attention. It is greeting the morning with breath instead of thought. And in those everyday movements, the path walks itself. The old abbot left behind a note before his passing. It read, "Those who hurry are carried by illusion. Those who walk with it vanish into the way." The monk later became a teacher. When asked by a student, "Where is the path?" he would only point at the floor beneath their feet. "Here," he'd say. "Now walk." So if you are still searching, still waiting to feel worthy, enlightened, or arrived, pause. Notice your breath. Feel your weight on the earth. Let this moment be enough, because the greatest truth, there is nowhere to get to, and still, you walk. The master was dying, not suddenly, not tragically, just quietly, like a season completing itself. His name was Master Togen, and he had taught for over 40 years. He never raised his voice, never insisted, never asked to be followed. But people came to him, pilgrims, monks, farmers, children, because when he looked at you, you felt seen beyond your name. Now, his breath was thin, his hands still, his body a whisper of what it once was. The disciples gathered at his bedside, each wondering the same thing. Would he speak? Would he leave them with one final truth, a farewell teaching, a verse, a koan? They waited, hearts leaning forward. But Master Togen said nothing, not even a word. He only gestured, weakly, to the small table beside his mat. Upon it stood a single candle, lit and steady. The wax had melted low. The flame burned soft but sure. The master's eyes lingered on it. Then He closed them and let go. The room held its breath. The disciples watched the candle. It flickered once, then twice, and just as the master's body cooled, the candle went out. No wind, no touch. It simply ended. This is the story of teaching through presence, of the final lesson not spoken, but lived. Commentary. We often believe the greatest teachings must be loud, dramatic, revolutionary, clear. But in Zen, the most profound truths are quiet. They arrive not with thunder, but with the stillness of a candle extinguishing itself. Master Togen's disciples wanted words, something to cling to quote, to remember. But he gave them something deeper, a mirror. The candle was his body, burning with presence, giving light, warming others, and when its time came, it did not resist, it did not protest, it simply completed its purpose and disappeared. That is the nature of life. To arrive, to offer, to pass. To resist this is to suffer. To accept it is to awaken. Some monks cried. Some stared at the floor. But one young disciple remained still, eyes on the wick. He bowed deeply and said, "I understand." The abbot later asked him, "What did you understand?" The young monk replied, "Nothing lasts, but everything lights the way while it's here." We fear death, but what we fear more is the idea of being forgotten, of being meaningless. So we seek last words, final victories, something to prove we existed. But Master Togen left only a flame, because the point was not to be remembered. It was to burn fully while here. The candle did not save its wax, did not ration its glow. It gave everything, slowly, humbly, until there was nothing left to give. And then it bowed out. That was his teaching. There is a Zen phrase, "When the light is gone, do not seek it in the ashes." The disciples learned this that day, not from a sermon, but from the absence that remained. Master Togen lives on, not in statues, not in scriptures, not in recorded sayings, but in how the monks now move, with care, with presence, with awareness that each moment is a wick, each breath a flame. So when your time comes, be like the candle. Don't worry about your legacy. Focus on your light. The river was wide and still, glass-like beneath the pale morning sky. Mist hovered just above the surface, curling and drifting like breath from a sleeping world. A single heron stood motionless at the water's edge, waiting for the ripples to still. On the far bank, the Buddha walked slowly toward the shore. His robe was the color of earth after rain, simple, unstained. In his hand, he carried only his bowl. And in his eyes, there was a depth that made even the wind seem to pause. The monks had already gathered beneath the Bodhi trees. Some sat cross-legged on dry leaves. Others stood in quiet reflection, watching the river. Today's teaching would not be long, nor loud, but it would be remembered. The Buddha stepped to the edge of the river and sat upon a low stone. The current moved slowly behind him, and in that quiet, he told a story. There was once a man, he said, who lived by a river much like this one. Every morning he bathed at dawn. Every evening he listened to the wind hum through the reeds. And one day, as he meditated near the shore, he saw a small boat drifting toward him. A few monks turned their heads toward the water as if expecting to see it. The boat was empty, the Buddha continued. No oars, no sail, just a simple wooden vessel carried by the current. The man smiled. There was peace in its stillness. No demands, no conversation, no self to disturb the quiet. But weeks later, the Buddha said, as he sat again near the water, another boat appeared. It drifted toward him, slow, gentle, and quiet as before. He raised his hand slowly, but this time there was a man in it. The listeners grew still, and as the boat drew closer, it veered slightly, striking the meditating man with a soft bump. The Buddha paused, and the man leapt up, furious. Some of the younger monks blinked. He shouted, the Buddha said. He scolded the other. He demanded to know why he had not steered, why he had disturbed his peace. There was a silence in the air now, a silence of recognition. But when the first boat struck him, when it was empty, he felt no anger. There was no one to blame, no insult to receive, no self to defend. He turned toward the water. Anger arises, he said, when we see another as the cause of our suffering, when we believe we have been wronged, when the self rises to declare, this should not have happened to me. The monks were very quiet now. But what if we saw all boats as empty? He asked. A breeze moved through the tall grasses. Somewhere, a bird called out once, then fell silent again. When another insults you, the Buddha said, they too are being carried by a current of pain, confusion, fear, conditioning. Just as the boat was moved by the river, they are moved by the winds of ignorance. He let the words settle. To shout at an empty boat, he said, is to shout at the river, to push the current with your hands, to exhaust yourself against what was never personal. A monk near the front, young, eager, lifted his gaze. His name was Tissa, and he had recently quarreled with another monk over the rules of chanting. Blessed One, he asked, but if someone harms us, deliberately, cruelly, is that not different than an empty boat? The Buddha nodded. Yes, intention matters, but even those who intend harm are caught in currents they do not fully see. He looked gently at Tissa. The man who lashes out is often protecting a wound. The woman who lies is often afraid. And when you react with anger, you are caught in your own boat, convinced it has a captain, steering by will. A senior monk, older with a weathered face and a calm demeanor, bowed slightly. I have learned, Lord, to hold my tongue, but the self still burns inside. I smile while feeling the fire of pride, of injury. The Buddha smiled gently. Then you have seen the fire. That is the first step. He reached down and picked up a small pebble. When a boat is struck, the water ripples, but it returns to stillness if we do not stir it further. He placed the stone down. Do not pretend there is no fire, but do not feed it. Watch it. Know its shape. See how it arises. And know this: it does not belong to you. The river flowed steadily behind them. A real boat now passed in the distance, its oars dipping quietly, evenly. You are not the boat. the Buddha said. You are not the current. You are not even the river. He looked to the horizon where the morning sun had begun to rise. You are the witness, the space through which all of it flows. A few monks closed their eyes. To let go of the self is not to disappear, he said. It is to stop clinging to what is not you, the story, the injury, the name Dot. He drew a shape in the sand beside him, an open circle. When you no longer need to be right, you listen differently. When you no longer need to be seen, you observe. When you let go of I and mine, peace is not something you chase, it is what remains. That night, as the wind cooled and the scent of lotus drifted on the breeze, the monk sat beside the river. Tissa approached the elder monk he had quarreled with, bowed deeply, and said nothing. No apology, no defense, just the stillness of an empty boat. The elder bowed in return, and in that silence, something greater was restored. In the years that followed, the teaching of the empty boat would spread like a soft echo, across rivers, over mountains, into cities and quiet huts. Not as doctrine, but as insight. That much of what we suffer is born from the illusion of a fixed self. That the insult, the injustice, the anger are often just ripples in a river that does not know your name. And when you learn to see each passing vessel as empty, not meaningless but free of blame, then you too can drift more lightly. Letting go, not to vanish, but to float. Still, aware, unmoved by the waves of the world. Like the Buddha that morning by the river, watching everything and holding nothing. With each breath, we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen, where the smallest stone may hold the greatest truth. Here starts the next story. The scholar arrived at the mountain temple with a scroll under one arm and confidence in his step. He had studied the texts. He had debated sutras with masters across the provinces. He had published writings on logic and perception, emptiness and form. And now, at last, he wished to learn Zen. He was met by the abbot, an old man with tired eyes and steady hands. They sat on floor cushions beneath a wooden beam. The room smelled of old cedar and rain-damp stone. Outside, the wind stirred the pine needles. The abbot said nothing. The scholar bowed. I have come to learn the true meaning of Zen. The abbot smiled and reached for the teapot. He poured and kept pouring. The cup filled, then overflowed. The tea spilled onto the tray, then the floor, pooling around the scholar's sleeve. Master! The scholar cried, pulling back. The cup is full! No more will go in! The abbot paused, then looked up, expression unchanged. Exactly, he said. If your cup is already full, how can I show you Zen? That was the lesson. No parable, no verse, no philosophy, just tea and the quiet sound of too much. In Zen, this story is often the first told, because so many who come to the practice do so with answers already in hand. Certainties, systems, names for things that have no names. But Zen is not a path of addition. It is a path of subtraction, not filling up, but emptying out, so that what cannot be spoken can finally be seen. Later that evening, the scholar sat alone in the courtyard. The wind had shifted. The trees swayed like old dancers in the dark. He touched the wet sleeve of his robe, still stained from the spilled tea. He thought of how much effort he had made, years of memorizing, comparing, analyzing, and now a cup of tea had undone him. The next morning, he returned to the abbot. He bowed deeper this time. "I will begin again," he said, "but this time I will begin with an empty cup." The abbot simply nodded and poured. In the West, we're taught to value accumulation, of knowledge, of opinions, of success. We believe wisdom is something gained, a kind of mental wealth, stacked neatly in rows. But in Zen, true seeing begins only when the shelves collapse, when we stop trying to name the wind and instead feel it on our skin. The story of the teacup is not just about humility, it's about presence, because most of us don't realize how full we are, not with wisdom, but with noise. Thoughts, fears, comparisons, labels for ourselves, judgments of others. Memories clinging like moss to the walls of the mind, and into that already crowded room, we try to invite truth. But truth is shy. It doesn't enter noise. It waits for silence. Once, a monk asked his teacher, "What is the essence of Zen?" The teacher picked up a broom and began sweeping, not as metaphor, but as truth. The monk blinked. "I meant the true essence." The teacher stopped, held up the broom, and said, "When your cup is empty enough to see this, then you'll know." The scholar stayed at the temple. He chopped wood, carried water, swept the garden path. He stopped trying to explain Zen and began living it. When thoughts rose, he bowed to them like old friends. When the wind blew, he listened. He stopped speaking about emptiness in essays and began to taste it in his bones. One afternoon, while washing bowls, another visitor arrived, a young academic from the capital, eager, brilliant, hungry for answers. He asked the abbot, "Master, what is Zen?" The abbot reached for the teapot. The scholar, now older and humbler, smiled gently and whispered under his breath, "Careful, your cup is already full." Commentary. We often think that wisdom means knowing more. But in Zen, wisdom is the art of unknowing, not ignorance, but freedom from the clutter of should and must, from the heavy robes of "I already know." To be empty is not to be void, it is to be receptive, to hold space for what arises, without grabbing it, without turning it into a theory. A teacup holds tea because it is empty. A mind holds peace because it is still. You cannot pour into what is already overflowing. You cannot meet truth if you are busy rehearsing your opinions. Zen is not an addition to your bookshelf. It is the moment you set the bookshelf on fire and warm your hands by the flames. There is a cup in all of us. Sometimes it's filled with pride, sometimes with fear, sometimes with knowledge we mistake for awakening. But when you're ready, when you truly long for clarity, you will tip that cup, let it spill, and then, and only then, will the tea of the present moment finally be poured. He sat beneath the Bodhi tree, its roots like arms cradling the earth, its leaves trembling in the hush before dawn. Siddhartha was still, not because he had nothing left to do, but because he had found the one thing worth doing. The grass beneath him held the warmth of day's memory. The river nearby whispered its ancient lullaby. Above, stars thinned into morning. And within him, the silence grew deep. He had made his vow to remain unmoved until he had reached the end of suffering. And so he breathed in, outside. The body sat like a mountain. The mind watched like the sky. But truth, before it flowers, is always tested, and so came Mara. Mara, the tempter, the king of illusion, the force of resistance in all beings who inch toward awakening. He did not come in one form, but many, not with a single sword, but with 1,000 voices. First, Mara sent desire. His daughters appeared, radiant and swaying. Their forms shimmered with beauty. Their voices sang sweet lullabies of longing and delight. They danced before the still figure under the tree, their laughter like bells. But Siddhartha did not stir. Their beauty held no hook. His gaze did not linger. He saw not bodies, but masks, not pleasure, but impermanence. Desire passed like perfume on the wind. Then Mara sent fear. The sky darkened, thunder cracked, demons emerged from shadows, fangs bared, eyes aflame, weapons of fire and bone in hand. They rushed the tree, screamed into Siddhartha's ears, hurled spears of doubt and arrows of terror. But Siddhartha did not flinch. The weapons turned to lotus petals as they neared him. The demons screamed, but their voices died in the vast silence that surrounded him. Fear had no place where nothing was clung to. Next came pride. Mara appeared himself, seated atop a colossal elephant, cloaked in glory. He laughed with disdain. "Who do you think you are?" he asked. "A prince playing holy man. What gives you the right to seek truth? You are alone, no teacher, no witness." Siddhartha looked up, calm and clear. He reached his right hand to touch the earth. And the earth responded. It is said that in that moment, the earth itself bore witness. The ground trembled gently. A breeze swept through the grove. The Bodhi tree's leaves shimmered like stars. The earth, vast and ancient, acknowledged Siddhartha's right to awaken. Mara's elephant stumbled. His illusions cracked. His army scattered like dust in wind. The tempter vanished, and all was still again. But the night was not yet over. With Mara gone, Siddhartha turned inward, deeper than ever before. He saw his past lives, hundreds, thousands, as farmer and king, as bird and beggar, as woman, child, beast, each life carrying joy and sorrow, birth and death. He saw the law of karma, how intentions shaped outcomes, how cruelty echoed, how kindness grew roots across lifetimes. He saw the chain of suffering, ignorance giving rise to craving, craving to clinging, clinging to becoming, becoming to birth, birth to decay and death. He saw that to break the chain, one must see clearly and let go. The dawn approached. The sky shifted from indigo to pale rose. Birds stirred in branches. The river shimmered. And in the first light of that new day, Siddhartha saw it, not as concept, not as hope, but as direct knowing. He saw the four noble truths, that suffering exists, that it arises from craving, that it can end, and that there is a path to its end. He saw the eightfold path unfolding before him like stepping stones across a great river. He saw suffering, and he saw its end. And in that moment, As the sun broke the horizon and the world breathed anew, Siddhartha became the Buddha, the awakened one. He opened his eyes, and the dew on every leaf sparkled with the same truth. Mara had been defeated, not with sword, not with spell, but with stillness, with clarity, with the earth itself as witness. The man who had walked away from gold and pleasure, who had starved beside the river, who had sat unmoved through storm and illusion, had now touched the infinite. And he smiled, not with triumph, but with compassion, because now he would teach, and the world would begin to wake. 7 weeks passed since his awakening beneath the Bodhi tree. 7 weeks of silence, reflection, and growing compassion. The Buddha, no longer Siddhartha, but one who had crossed the stream of ignorance, walked alone in the forest near Uruvela. The world felt both new and ancient. The birds sang with clarity, the wind carried the scent of blossoms and dust, and in every sound he heard the stillness of knowing. But his heart, now free, did not rest in solitude. He knew the truth he had seen was not his to keep. So he rose, wrapped his robe over his shoulder, and began to walk, not as a prince, not as an ascetic, but as a teacher. His feet touched earth gently, his gaze met all beings with kindness, and he made his way towards Sarnath, where 5 men waited, though they did not know they waited. They were the same 5 ascetics who had left him, thinking he had strayed from the path when he accepted Sujata's offering. They had called him weak, indulgent, lost, but he did not carry resentment, only clarity. The journey was long, days passed, villages blurred, children played in the dust, farmers bowed their heads, some offered fruit, some only stared. But at last, in the quiet of a fading afternoon, the Buddha entered the deer park at Isipatana. There the 5 ascetics sat, wrapped in threadbare robes, debating truths with furrowed brows and hollow bellies. When they saw him approach, they whispered, "He has returned. We will not rise. He abandoned discipline." But as he came closer, something shifted. There was no pride in his walk, no hunger in his eyes, only peace. And before they could speak, they stood, drawn to him not by obligation, but by presence. He greeted them with a bow and sat. Under the dappled shade of sal trees, the Buddha began to speak. He did not speak of gods. He did not speak of punishment or reward. He spoke of suffering, what he called dukkha. He spoke of its cause. He spoke of its end. And he spoke of the path, the 4 noble truths, the 8-fold path, right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration. He spoke not as a prophet, but as a physician, diagnosing the illness of the world and offering its cure. He taught that the middle way led not to pleasure, not to pain, but to peace. He taught that liberation was possible here. Now the 5 listened, at first with skepticism, then with stillness, then with something like reverence. And when he finished, he said, "This is the Dharma, deep, subtle, difficult to see, yet available to all who look." And one among them, Kondanya, understood, truly understood. The Buddha smiled. Kondanya has seen, Kondanya knows. And thus, the wheel of Dharma turned for the first time, not with thunder, not with trumpets, but but with one man sitting beneath trees, speaking truth to 5. That day, the Sangha, the community of practitioners, was born. The Buddha did not seek converts. He sought clarity. He offered a path, not to heaven, but to freedom. And the world, turning slowly, began to wake. That was the first turning, the beginning of a journey that would circle through centuries, that would carry footprints across mountains, across oceans, across hearts, all from one voice, in one park. Among deer, leaves, and sky, the path of Zen unfolds like morning mist, soft and patient. In this next tale, we are invited to see, beyond appearance, into essence. Listen carefully to the next story. There was once a mirror. Polished and flawless, it reflected everything. The mountain at dawn, the child's laugh, the tired lines on an old woman's face. It made no judgment. It added nothing. It simply showed the truth. But slowly, over time, dust began to settle on the mirror. Just a little each day. First, the soft film of daily life, breath, skin, wind. Then more, smoke from cooking fires, damp from morning rain. The mirror was not broken, but what it showed became dull, distorted, not because it had changed, but because the dust had gathered. One day, someone passed by and frowned. "This mirror is useless," they said. "It doesn't reflect anything clearly." Another agreed. "It must be flawed." But then an old caretaker stepped forward. She took a cloth, wiped once, twice, 3 times, and beneath her hand, the shine returned, not because she added anything, but because she removed what didn't belong. This is the story of the mind, not just in Buddhism, in life. Your mind is a mirror, naturally clear, naturally reflective. It was never meant to cling, or distort, or judge. It was meant to see. But like the mirror, it gathers dust, thoughts, memories, opinions, wounds, desires, stories. Each one a fine layer, each one settling so softly that you hardly notice, until one day, you no longer see clearly. You don't see the other person, you see your story about them. You don't feel this moment, you feel your expectations. You don't hear the sound of the bell, you hear your evaluation of its pitch, not because you are broken, but because there's dust. And dust can be wiped away. In the Zen tradition, this teaching is central. A monk once asked the master, "What is enlightenment?" The master picked up a cloth and said, "Wipe your mirror." You don't have to become something new. You don't have to add insight or brilliance. You don't have to fix yourself. You only have to clear the dust, not all at once, not perfectly, just honestly and patiently. Meditation is not performance. It is polishing. Each breath, a gentle wipe. Each moment of awareness, a cloth across the surface. Not dramatic, not flashy, but steady. And over time, things begin to gleam. One day you sit, you feel anxious, you name it. Dust, you return to the breath. Another thought, dust. You return again and again, and after many days or months or years, you look up and realize the world is more beautiful, not because it changed, but because now you're seeing it. There's a line in the Platform Sutra. Our nature is originally pure. It is because of false thoughts that we cannot realize it. This is not a scolding. It is an invitation. It says, your clarity is still there. Don't give up. Just wipe gently. Sometimes we think dust is who we are. I am angry. I am anxious. I am not enough. But you are not the dust. You are the mirror beneath it, always capable of reflecting light. Even anger, when seen clearly, becomes insight. Even sorrow, when held with presence, becomes compassion. Even fear, when understood, becomes freedom. Because when the mirror clears, everything reveals its true shape. Commentary. The mirror and the dust is not just a metaphor, it is a daily practice. It teaches us that effort matters, that clarity is not permanent, but neither is confusion. That we don't need to judge the dust, just see it and wipe. You may sit today and feel cloudy. Thoughts may swirl, but every moment you stay, every time you bring your hand to the surface of your own experience, you are remembering, you are seeing, you are restoring the mirror. In a monastery garden, a novice once asked his teacher, "How do I become wise?" The teacher handed him a cloth and pointed to the windows. "Start here," he said. And so the novice began. And as the glass cleared, so did his mind. The world doesn't need you to shine brighter. It needs you to see clearly. And the first step is this: pause, look at your thoughts, smile at them, and then wipe gently, without shame. Because beneath it all, you were always the mirror. In the days when animals still spoke the language of the wind and trees, there lived a turtle in a wide, sparkling pond near the edge of a small village. The water was clean, the lilies bloomed, dragonflies shimmered like tiny blades of light, and frogs sang in harmony beneath the moon. And in the center of it all, floating lazily on a flat, sun-warmed rock, was a turtle with a sharp mind and a sharper tongue. He was clever, observant, wise even, but he had one weakness. He could not stop talking. This turtle, who in a past life had been the Buddha, spent his days offering advice to fish, telling stories to tadpoles, and correcting the herons who perched too long on the reeds. He spoke of the stars, of the weather, of the foolishness of men and the arrogance of birds. And many listened at first. But over time, some began to swim a little farther from his rock. The frogs coughed politely and leapt away. Even the dragonflies found quieter lily pads to rest on. Still, the turtle spoke. He spoke when no one was near. He spoke when others slept. He spoke not to be heard, but because silence felt like drowning. One summer, the rains did not come. The sky cracked but gave no water. The pond shrank. Lilies withered. The fish moved deeper, their numbers fewer each day. 2 wild geese, passing overhead, noticed the shrinking pond and circled down. They landed beside the turtle and dipped their beaks in the muddy shallows. "This place won't last much longer," one said. "Soon it will be dry." The other nodded. "We should help whoever we can." The turtle, curious, swam closer. "Help? How?" The first goose blinked. "We will carry the small fish to deeper waters, and if you like, we can carry you too." The turtle's eyes widened. "You would do that?" "Of course. said the second goose, but only if you can stay silent. Silent? The turtle echoed. Yes, said the first. We will hold a stick between our beaks. You must bite down on the center and hold on. But if you speak, even one word, you'll fall. The turtle hesitated. Not talk? For an entire journey? He looked around. The pond was shrinking. His friends were gone. The mud cracked beneath the sun. He took a breath. Very well, he said. I will be silent. The next morning, the geese returned with a sturdy stick. They each gripped one end in their beaks. The turtle bit down on the center with determination. Together, they rose into the sky, wings strong, the turtle dangling like a pendant between them. He had never seen the world like this before. Forests stretched like ocean waves. Rivers wound like silver ropes. Hills rolled beneath them like sleeping beasts. And far below, people looked up and pointed. Look, a child cried, a flying turtle. Laughter rippled through the village. A man shaded his eyes. What a strange sight. A turtle who thinks he's a bird. They laughed louder. They clapped and jeered. The turtle heard every word. His mouth tightened on the stick. He thought of clever comebacks, of biting remarks, of lessons he could teach these fools from above. And then he couldn't help himself. I'll show you who's foolish. But the moment his mouth opened, he fell. Down, down through the sky, tumbling through wind and silence and regret until he struck the earth and never rose again. The geese circled once, then flew on. And below, the villagers stood in stunned silence beside the broken shell of the creature who could not stay silent. Later, when this tale reached the forest monasteries, a monk asked the Buddha, was the turtle's mistake pride? No, said the Buddha, it was attachment. Not to his body, but to his voice. To the belief that every thought must be shared. He looked at the monk kindly. There is wisdom in knowing when to speak, but greater wisdom in knowing when not to. And so, the story of the turtle who couldn't stop talking passed from village to village. Not as mockery, but as reminder that words are like seeds. They grow even when we forget we've planted them, and some, if spoken at the wrong time, can fall like stones. Because restraint is not weakness. It is strength disguised as silence. And sometimes, silence is the loudest wisdom of all. The banks of the Ganges shimmered with morning light. Mist curled like white breath from the earth, and birds traced wide arcs above the water. The river flowed as it always had, unhurried, ancient, indifferent. Upon a small rise near the city of Gaya, the Buddha stood. His saffron robes caught the first golden threads of sunlight, and his presence seemed to quiet even the wind. Around him gathered 1,000 ascetics, silent, weathered, lean with years of discipline. Their robes were coarse, their skin bronzed by fire and wind. Their eyes held questions that words could not form. They had come to hear him, not because he promised liberation, but because he had found it. These were men who had walked barefoot on burning sand, who had held their breath until stars blurred in their vision, who had fasted until even hunger grew silent. They had known pain. They had studied sacred fire. They had chanted, scarred, endured, but they had not known peace. And so they came, not to challenge, but to listen. The Buddha began not with praise, nor with rules, nor with doctrine. He began with fire. All is burning, he said. A ripple moved through the crowd like wind across tall grass. He paused. Let the silence stretch, like the space between flames. All is burning, he repeated. The I is burning, forms are burning, I consciousness is burning. He spoke slowly, deliberately, each word striking like a drumbeat in the still morning air. Burning with what? With the fire of lust, the fire of hatred, the fire of delusion? Some closed their eyes, others frowned. A few leaned forward, their breaths caught. The Buddha looked upon them, not with challenge, but with compassion. This body you cling to, he said, it is a wick. This mind you chase through craving, a spark. And each time you grasp, each time you say, mine, you feed the fire. A breeze moved across the Ganges. It stirred the edges of robes. It cooled nothing. The Buddha continued. The world is ablaze, but not with wood and coal. It burns with longing, with grasping, with thirst. He walked slowly among them, not above, not apart. His steps made no sound. Eyes that chase beauty, ears that crave praise, tongues that seek sweetness, minds that hunger for permanence. He turned and lifted his simple alms bowl. This too is not mine. It holds food today. Tomorrow, it may be empty. I thank it either way. From the back, an old ascetic raised his hand. Are we to abandon joy? He asked. Is not joy the goal? The Buddha smiled faintly. No, he said. Not joy. Only the craving for joy. Let joy arise. Let it come like wind through trees. But do not chase it. Do not bind to it. Do not say, this is mine. For the flame you grasp will burn your hand. Another monk asked quietly, how do we live in a burning world? The Buddha looked at him with eyes deep as a still lake. Like a man who sees the blaze, he said. Who walks with care, breathes with wisdom, and holds no illusion that the fire is shelter. A hush fell over the gathering, not from fear, but from recognition. The fire was not only in the cities, or in war, or in anger. It was inside them, inside each grasping thought, each clenched desire. The Buddha sat upon the earth. He drew a circle in the dust with his finger. Inside this circle, he said, are your perceptions, your feelings, your ideas. They rise like smoke. They change like flame. They disappear like ash. Do not build your home in a fire. A younger monk, no more than 20 summers old, whispered, then where do we dwell, Master? The Buddha looked up. In awareness, he said. In equanimity. In the space between sparks. Be the witness, not the fuel. The monks bowed their heads. Some wept. Not from sorrow, but from something else. From release, from clarity, from the sudden lightness of realizing they could put something down. That night, they built no fires. There were no chants, no ceremonies. They ate simply, drank river water, and sat in silence. But the silence was not empty. It was watchful. Each monk sat with his own flickering flame. Some remembered the pain of hunger they had forced upon themselves. Others remembered the pride they had felt when praised for discipline. Some saw anger they had not named, others grief, and they did not suppress these fires. They simply watched. And in the watching, something shifted. Not extinguished, but no longer fed. In the days that followed, the change was quiet but real. Monks who had once worshipped sacred flame, who had walked barefoot on coals, branded their skin, sat in the sun for days, now turned to a gentler discipline. They practiced release. They rose with the sun. They swept the courtyard slowly. They bowed not to fire, but to understanding. When visitors asked them what the Buddha had taught that morning, they did not recite scriptures. They did not speak of rebirth or karma or cosmology. They said only, "He showed us the fire and told us we did not have to live in it." The fire sermon was spoken many times across the years, but none more powerful than that first morning on the river bank, when the smoke from the city's cooking fires curled upward, mirroring the craving in every heart, and the Buddha, with nothing in his hands and peace in his gaze, simply said, "Let it burn, let it pass, and do not be consumed." In the hush of understanding, Zen offers us another glimpse of what it means to recognize worth not by weight or shine, but by presence. Here starts the next story. There was once a dog who barked at everything: leaves in the wind, a child's laughter, the moon. He lived near the edge of a monastery in the countryside, a dusty patch of land behind the kitchen where scraps were tossed and shadows flickered on old stone walls. The monks called him Naga. No one knew where he came from. He was just always there, tail curled, eyes sharp, teeth ready, and always barking. When visitors arrived, he barked. When bells rang, he barked. Even when nothing moved at all, he barked, as if the world itself was suspicious. Some monks avoided him. "Too wild," they muttered. Others threw him bread or whispered mantras for his restless soul. But one monk, elderly, slow-moving, soft-spoken, began to sit near him each morning. No words, no food, just presence. He would settle into the grass, cross-legged, a few paces from Naga's resting place. He didn't reach for him, didn't scold the barking. He just sat. At first, Naga barked at him too, low growls, sharp yelps, but the monk remained still, breathing in, breathing out, no threat, no fear, no reaction. Days passed, then weeks. Naga still barked at others, still snarled at passing carts or fluttering robes, but not at the old monk. Eventually, when the monk arrived, Naga would simply lift his head and then rest it again. One morning, the monk placed a small bowl of water nearby. Naga didn't touch it, not for an hour, but as the sun climbed, he finally approached, drank, then sat beside the bowl. The monk said nothing, only smiled. A younger monk watching from the corridor asked later, "Master, how did you calm him? We've tried so many things, food, scolding, chants." The old monk replied, "He barked because the world barked back. He expected resistance, but when he found none, he started listening." Reactivity, the monk would later teach, is like a match near dry grass. One spark, and the fire spreads. But if the grass is damp, soft, grounded, the flame fizzles out. Naga still barked sometimes, but not with the same edge, not with the same fear. And when the old monk passed away years later, Naga lay beside his meditation cushion for 3 days, silent, not whimpering, not barking, just there. Monks and novices alike noticed. A dog who once barked at everything, now holding space for grief, with the stillness of a cloud. There is a saying, when you stop reacting, you start seeing. The dog had seen the one thing no command could teach, that peace isn't taught through force, but through presence that does not flinch. In one hand, he carries a book, the Prajnaparamita Sutra, the perfection of wisdom. In the other, he wields a sword, long, luminous, and aflame with clarity. He rides a lion, not to show power, but to symbolize the fearlessness of insight. This is Manjushri, the bodhisattva of wisdom, where Avalokiteshvara brings compassion, where Samantabhadra brings vow and action. Manjushri brings the sharp, radiant truth. His name means gentle glory, but his wisdom is not soft. It does not comfort. It cuts. It slices through illusion with the precision of a blade honed on silence. The sword he carries is not for battle. It is for discernment. It separates appearance from reality, self from no self, thought from knowing. It reveals what we are too afraid to see and too free not to see. In the old sutras, it is said that Manjushri's wisdom is so sharp, he was enlightened before the Buddhas of the past. He is the eternal teenager of the Mahayana pantheon, ever young, ever clear, ever unburdened by delusion. Where others hesitate, Manjushri speaks. Where others follow rules, Manjushri asks why. Where others cling to views, Manjushri lets go, again and again and again. One day a monk asked him, "What is the nature of ultimate reality?" And Manjushri drew his sword in the air, then lowered it slowly, as if slicing through something invisible. That was his answer. Because words can't always hold wisdom. Sometimes it must be shown. In Zen temples, the figure of Manjushri is often placed behind the Roshi's seat, not as decoration, but as a reminder that true teaching must be rooted in clarity, that every word spoken should come from a place that has already cut through ego, opinion, attachment. The teacher, like Manjushri, must see clearly before they speak. There is a famous koan. A young monk full of doctrine said to the master, "I've memorized the Heart Sutra. I understand emptiness. There is no I, no ear, no mind, no path, no attainment." The master pointed to a bowl of rice and said, "Then eat, because understanding is not the point. Living is." This is what Manjushri teaches, wisdom that is not locked in scriptures, but embodied, applied, lived. The sword is not aggressive, it is necessary to wake us, to free us, to carve away the clinging and the confusion until only truth remains. Not an idea, but a mirror with no dust. There's a story told in the mountains. A disciple sat meditating, trying to silence his thoughts. He came to Manjushri in prayer and asked, "Please cut away my illusions." That night, in a dream, Manjushri appeared. He said nothing, only lifted his sword and placed it gently on the disciple's shoulder, not to strike, but to remind him, the blade is not outside you. It is within. Commentary. Manjushri does not give you answers. He gives you the means to see for yourself. That is his wisdom, not dogma, but discernment. Not belief, but perception stripped of filter. The sword cuts two ways. It cuts through ignorance, but also through comfort. It forces us to ask, what have I built my life on? And what happens when that is no longer solid? Can I let go? Can I breathe? Even when the ground beneath me vanishes. Wisdom is not knowing more. It is needing less. It is silence that doesn't need applause. It is clarity that does not waver in the dark. It is the ability to sit in confusion and not flinch, to stand before illusion and not bow, to name what is and let go of what is not. The lion Manjushri rides is not a beast of war. It is the mind that has been tamed. The roar is no longer fear. It is the roar of reality unfiltered. The courage to face things as they are. There's a quiet danger in spiritual life. We want wisdom to feel good, to validate us, to comfort the parts of us that ache. But Manjushri reminds us, true wisdom will sometimes hurt. It will dismantle the story we've told ourselves. It will whisper, you are not who you think you are. And if we listen, the story ends and life begins. In your own practice, the sword appears in many forms. The question you can't answer. The moment you realize you've been wrong. The teacher who looks you in the eye and says nothing because anything they say would only get in the way. That is the sword, cutting gently, so you can see clearly. You don't have to fear it. You have to wield it. In kindness, in honesty, in the decision to no longer live half asleep. When you chant, chant with the sword. When you bow, bow with the sword. When you love, love with the sword. Not to harm, but to see clearly what love is. Because love without wisdom is sentiment, and wisdom without love is cold. But together, they are Manjushri and Avalokiteshvara, and the path itself, in the heart of a wealthy city, wrapped in silk and stone, lived a man who had everything. Gold draped his halls. Ivory framed his mirrors. Incense curled in soft waves from brass burners that never cooled. His name was Viran. He owned land, warehouses, servants, even ships that crossed oceans bearing his name on their sails. And yet, he could not sleep. Each night, he turned beneath embroidered sheets, his mind counting coins like sheep. Each morning, he awoke with new orders, new demands, new acquisitions. He kept building, kept gathering, but inside there was a tightness he could not name. One day, as he stepped from his carriage, he noticed a beggar sitting beside the temple gate. The beggar's robe was faded and torn. His alms bowl was empty, but his eyes were calm, still as a pond before dawn. Viran glanced at him and scoffed. "If I had nothing," he said, "I would not smile." The beggar bowed. "If you truly had nothing," he said, "you might finally know peace." The words followed Viran like a shadow. He tried to forget them, tried to drown them in wine, in silk, in celebration. But they clung like a thread caught in the lining of his soul. The next morning, he returned to the temple. The beggar was still there, eyes closed, back straight, breath soft. "How do you do this?" Viran asked. You have no food, no roof, no gold, and yet you sit like you own the world. The beggar opened his eyes. I do not own the world, he said, but the world no longer owns me. Viran stared. Something inside him cracked. That day he left behind his ring. The next, his jeweled belt. Then quietly, he began walking to the temple each morning, leaving behind one possession at a time. No ceremony, no announcement, just letting go, piece by piece. The beggar never asked, never praised. He simply shared his seat on the stone step. Weeks passed. One morning, Viran arrived barefoot. No rings, no silks, no guards, only his breath and the ache in his knees. He sat beside the beggar, closed his eyes, and for the first time in years, he felt nothing pulling at him. No hunger for more, no fear of losing, no need to be seen, just stillness. He opened his eyes. Have I become poor? He asked. The beggar smiled. No, he said softly. You've become free. This is the story of true wealth, the kind that doesn't glitter, but glows from within. Commentary. Wealth is not evil, it is neutral. Like a knife, it can feed or wound. Like fire, it can warm or consume. The Buddha taught that attachment, not possession, is the root of suffering. You can have little and still cling. You can have much and still be free. The beggar was not rich in gold, but he had space. He had his breath, his presence, his peace. He was not owned by anything, not even his own suffering. The parable reminds us, you are not your bank balance, not your reputation, not your wardrobe or your followers. You are the one who notices, the one who breathes, the one who can let go. Letting go is not about loss. It is about choice. When you no longer need a thing to feel complete, you are free to enjoy it or leave it without fear. That is the highest wealth. There's a Zen proverb, when I had nothing, I had everything. It does not mean destitution. It means this: when your hands are not full of fear and control, they are finally open to life. So whether you own much or little, ask yourself, do these things serve me? Or do I serve them? If they crumble, do I crumble too? Or am I the same presence, the same breath, the same open sky? Regardless, true wealth is not counted. It is felt. It is the spaciousness of a mind that can sit still beside a bowl, empty or full, and smile just the same. Be that kind of rich. As the lantern of awareness glows a little brighter, we come to a tale about seeing with more than the eyes. Let the stillness guide you now, and listen carefully to the next story.